Chapter 1179. Master Yin wasn't too strong. The only surprising thing about him was that he had a berserk, fire, bloodline. But Qin Yu could sense that this bloodline wasn't enough to attract the powerful soul bodies in the mystic realm. The possibility of this being a coincidence was so low that it could be ignored. In other words, there was a high chance that Master Yin was hiding some attribute that Qin Yu hadn't noticed yet. And this attribute was extremely attractive to the powerful soul bodies hidden in the mystic realm. But this assumption didn't make sense. If this was the case, then why did the powerful soul bodies in the mystic realm only send out such a weak monster beast? After all, besides its superb concealment ability, the monster beast's strength was nearly negligible after being killed by Qin Yu. Perhaps it was because it was in the middle of something important and couldn't spare too much strength, or perhaps it was tied up by something else. After all, it wasn't just Qin Yu and his group that had entered the mystic realm. Who knew how many tyrannical characters were hidden within? Qin Yu took a deep breath and steadied his thoughts. His eyes fell on Master Yin. He had originally decided to do his best to save Master Yin. But now, do my best had become definitely. Qin Yu's intuition told him that Master Yin was likely the key to finding the soul bodies in the mystic realm. Yun Che was startled and angry. This is... Qin Yu had no intention of explaining. I will carefully examine her first. Tell me everything about Master Yin. Complete meant not hiding anything. The more comprehensive the information he knew, the more likely he was to find the crux of the problem and save her life. Yun Che was clearly hesitant, but he soon understood. He glanced at Zhou Cheng. The honest man hadn't yet emerged from his depressed state. He dryly said that he was going to guard the surroundings, and then walked away. Qin Yu didn't wait. After speaking, he began to examine Master Yin's condition in detail. Finger contact was unavoidable. This was a bloodline backlash. Although the dark mark had barely suppressed it, internal injuries had already occurred. Qin Yu had to determine the severity of these injuries. He could only apologize in his heart and ensure that he didn't look sideways. Then he heard an incomparably cliché story from Yun Che's mouth. In summary, it was simple. A heartless man abandoned his wife and son. The man he spoke of came from the fire lineage. Because he had a union with a woman from the outside, his bloodline inheritance was incomplete. Yun Che did not awaken, but Yun Shi's luck was a little worse. She said that she was unlucky because the flame baptism bloodline in her body was not complete, so it was not stable. The reason she could live until now was because it had been in a sealed state. Once it was activated, the berserk bloodline power would burn her to ashes from the inside out. Qin Yu lifted a hand and pinched the point between his eyebrows. This was a completely subconscious action, but he could smell the faint fragrance of a woman on his fingertips. He coughed lightly and put down his hand. I already know what happened. Let me think about it. Everything in the world seemed simple, but in reality it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Take Yun Shi's condition, for example. The crux of the problem was that his bloodline was incomplete. All he had to do was fix it. Such a simple matter. But the problem was how to make up for it? Of course, if one were to cripple her bloodline of flames, Yun Shi might still be able to survive. However, if she were to suffer the backlash from her bloodline, she would only be able to remain as a living corpse for the rest of her life. Mending the bloodline, or thinking of other alternatives, should be the only choice. Qin Yu had many methods to kill, but if he were to save someone, he still had the potion that Liao Shi had left for him. But that thing was for the abyssal races to use. If he fed it to Yun Shi, it would be no different from murder. There was nothing he could do about it. No matter how long he thought about it, it would only be a waste of time. Luckily, the one using his brain right now wasn't Qin Yu. He directly laid down his words. It was likely that Yun Shi was the key to capturing a powerful soul body in the mystic realm. She absolutely could not die. To the old turtle, the soul strength contained within the golden crystal heart had already caused his liver to tremble with excitement. His desire to possess the main body that had split off from this heart had reached an unprecedented peak. At this time, let alone thinking of a way to save Yunshi, even if he had to reveal himself and run a circle around the mystic realm naked, he would still seriously consider it. Pressure was a driving force, but what was stronger than pressure was an infinitely burning passion for life. With the help of this passion, the old turtle actually thought of a way to save Yunshi, mending the bloodline. Indeed, there was nothing new about this idea, but he didn't just say it out loud. Rather, he provided Qinyu with a relatively perfect plan. After careful deliberation, he found that there was indeed a high chance of success. Of course, a 100% guarantee was impossible. In addition, this method came from the shadow of the abyss. If he used it in the vast Yang world, who knew whether or not some inexplicable change would occur? But this was already enough. It was better than waiting for Yunshi to die in this state. Qinyu lifted a hand and placed it between her eyebrows. After several breaths of time, he took it back. As he poured strength into it, the dark mark began to brighten. But Qinyu was well aware that the time it could be maintained was limited. Moreover, as more strength was poured into it, it would become shorter and shorter. He stood up and looked at Yunshi. He directly said, "I have already thought of a way to save her, but the process will be dangerous. You and Zhou Cheng cannot follow me." This was the truth. For instance, in the battle in the mountain valley, Yunshi and Zhou Cheng had to retreat first. Otherwise, they would have been in great danger. This time, they had been given time to retreat. But what about next time? It had to be known that life-saving methods were never easy to achieve. Moreover, the method that the old turtle from the abyss had given Qinyu could be considered harsh and cruel no matter how one looked at it. Qinyu himself might have to take a risk, but he didn't have full confidence that he could guarantee their safety. Yunshi's complexion changed. He glanced at the unconscious Yunshi and clenched his teeth. He turned and knelt to the ground. "Brother Qin, I leave my sister to you. If you can save her life, I will never forget this great kindness." Qinyu accepted his kneeling. "I will do my best." He picked up Yunshi and turned. With several flickers, he vanished from sight. Zhou Cheng ran over, his eyes wide. What happened? Where did Qinyu take Yunshi? Yunshi bitterly smiled. "I don't know, but this is Yunshi's only hope of survival." They hadn't known each other for long. Even if he was saved by Qinyu, as he said, he had his own reasons for doing things. In terms of his heart, Yunshi certainly couldn't trust Qinyu without reservation. But he had no other choice. Otherwise, he could only watch helplessly on as Yunshi was burned to death by the rampaging fire bloodline. Carrying the unconscious Yunshi, Qinyu's speed was much slower. He had to be more cautious to avoid falling into a dangerous situation. The current Yunshi didn't have the strength to protect herself. The slightest mistake could cost her her life. Luckily, he wasn't pressed for time. Moreover, Qinyu already knew where to find the person who could save Yunshi. That's right, it was one person. According to the rules of the abyss that the old turtle spoke of, in order to save one person's life, one had to give up another. This was in accordance with the principle of fairness. This was the principle of fair exchange. Yunshi's bloodline was incomplete, causing her to go berserk and pose a threat to her life. Then he would extract a complete one, fuse the two together, and then return it to her body. Everything would be easily solved. If Yunshi was lucky, she might even be able to profit from this disaster. Her bloodline would become incomparably powerful. But, as I said before, everything was easier said than done. This was no simple matter and required extremely harsh conditions. If it weren't for the old turtle helping him, it would have been impossible for Qinyu to accomplish this. Bang! The ground suddenly shattered and countless palm-sized winged insects drilled out. They opened their mouths wide and screeched, revealing their fangs. As their shrill screeches entered his ears, they were like thin needles that ruthlessly pierced through his skull, twisting and turning in his mind. At the same time, these fierce-looking little things that had extremely sharp teeth began to flap their wings and rush over. Humph! Qin Yu coldly coughed. He came to a stop and stomped his feet. Bang! With a dull thud, the void trembled. Ripples spread out in all directions. Paw! Paw! The insects that rushed over were crushed to pieces. Flesh and blood splashed out, and a foul stench filled the air. But the death of their own kind didn't scare them away. Instead, they became even more ruthless. In the blink of an eye, an endless stream of insects rushed out from the ground. They used the fragments of their corpses to submerge Qin Yu, who was holding onto Yunshi. Although they weren't strong individually, they didn't fear death. In addition to their large numbers, there was simply an endless stream of them. If he killed one, then two would come. It was like ants biting an elephant to death. If he continued to be surrounded like this, once he exhausted all his strength, all that awaited him would be nothing but death. Perhaps it was because the mark of darkness had taken effect and Qin Yu's body had recovered a little, or perhaps it was because of the endless insect monsters that the screeches were simply too terrifying. The sleeping Yunshi's face paled. Her body trembled as she opened her eyes. She had a pained expression, and blood began to seep out from the corners of her eyes. Qin Yu lifted a hand and placed it between her eyebrows. "Don't listen to me. We will be able to leave soon." Yunshi struggled to speak. Big brother Qin, she wasn't dead yet. But it was truly excruciating. It was as if many red-hot irons had been shoved into her body. At every moment, her flesh and blood were being burned. The endless pain was enough to cause one's consciousness to collapse. Yunshi instinctively hugged Qin Yu. "Big brother Qin, I feel so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable." Qin Yu parted his fingers, revealing a crack. He looked at her struggling eyes and said, "If you feel uncomfortable, it means that you are still alive. Trust me, you will be fine soon." Without waiting for Yunshi's reply, Qin Yu exerted a bit more strength with his other hand. The pained Yunshi's eyes rolled back and she fainted once more. The mark of darkness between her eyebrows was much dimmer than it was at the start. This was much faster than Qin Yu had expected. The situation was extremely tricky. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu pulled out a hand and clenched his fingers into a fist. He let out a deep breath and punched forwards. Dong! It was like an incomparably large leather drum had been struck. As the drum vibrated, it set off a ring of fluctuations. Wherever these fluctuations swept out, all of the ferocious and fearless insect monsters instantly froze where they were. In the next moment, there was a series of crackling sounds. Countless corpses and pieces of flesh rained down like a downpour of flesh and blood. Chapter 1180. In this world, there was no true fairness or justice. Treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime, meant that if one took a treasure that didn't match one's strength, they would provoke a disaster. This was easier to deal with. If one tactfully made a deal or took the initiative to offer treasures to find a backer, then losses were losses and they could still ensure their own safety. But what if this jade pendant was your body? What would you do then? Through a lucky chance, it gave birth to sentience and experienced countless trials and tribulations to grow. But in the end, it was discovered that it was nothing more than a meal chosen by others. This result was difficult to accept. Since it wasn't willing to accept it, it could only resist. The difficulty was obvious. After all, in terms of strength, the difference was far too great. Or, it was more accurate to say that in this vast world, how many people had the strength to protect themselves when faced with the greed of these people? If the road of resistance couldn't be taken, then it could only think of a solution from within itself. Since what they wanted was the strength born in my body, then they would stain it and make it lose all value. Of course, this road wasn't easy to walk and was incomparably dangerous. But if there was another choice, who would make this choice? Hate? Of course it was hate. But this was how the world had been since ancient times. It wasn't the first to suffer this, nor would it be the last. In this world, The only thing it could do was endure. So this was fate. This was my fate and also your fate. No one could blame anyone else. If there was something to blame, then blame yourself for living in this world. Qin Yu's journey became even more difficult. If it weren't for his experience in the abyss and his strength greatly increasing, he might have already died. All sorts of monsters from mystic realms attacked him without end. He was like a bonfire in the dark night, attracting fangs from all directions. Of course, Qin Yu was well aware that while he was the one bearing the attacks of the monsters from the mystic realm, the true source of attraction was Master Yin. If Qin Yu had some doubts about his previous conjecture, then now he was absolutely sure. Master Yin did possess a special attribute that attracted the soul bodies of mystic realms. There was also one more thing he could confirm. This soul body that split into countless avatars and attracted cultivators into the mystic realm was currently occupied by something. Otherwise, the attacks that Qin Yu withstood wouldn't be so simple. Simple was only relatively speaking. If it were any other cultivator, even an original soul realm powerhouse wouldn't necessarily be able to withstand it. Qin Yu's current condition was okay. There shouldn't be any problems in the near future. However, if this were to continue, it would only be a matter of time before something went wrong. There was an endless stream of monsters in the mystic realm. Without sufficient time to rest, there would come a time when their strength would be exhausted. Therefore, he had to think of a way to change the current situation. Qin Yu looked down at the unconscious Master Yin. The reason lay with her. If he couldn't find the crux of the problem, then it had to be the entire seal. He suppressed Yin Shi's aura and isolated him from the outside world. Bang! Darkness erupted like sticky ink, drowning Master Yin and forming a pitch-black cloud. But as it turned out, the power of darkness was unable to truly seal Yin Shi's aura. After experiencing 2 more waves of monster attacks from mystic realms, Qin Yu had no choice but to admit defeat. If darkness was ineffective, then what about light? A day later, the ground loudly shattered and Qin Yu rushed out. Cries of despair echoed out from underground. The earth crazily shook and loud bangs echoed out without end. Countless thick roots tore through the earth and danced in the air. After exhausting the last of its life force, it powerlessly fell to the ground. In order to kill this terrifying plant monster that was similar to the vine he had encountered before, Qin Yu had exhausted a great deal of strength. His face paled and he couldn't help but cough, blood splashing out from his palms. His injuries weren't too serious, but he was incomparably exhausted. Even if he was extremely strong, in this state he could only display 60 to 70% of his strength. He had to think of a way. In the end, the reason he had given up on his original plan to pass through the endless sea and ventured into this mystic realm was to extend the life of the old turtle. Thus, Qin Yu didn't feel any pressure ordering him around. Moreover, this fellow had eaten too much recently, so it wasn't a bad idea to let him move around. Qin Yu didn't continue on his way. Instead, he rushed into a cave and smashed the original owner of this mystic realm monster into meat paste. Then, the power of darkness and light simultaneously erupted, crisscrossing the entire cave and dividing it into countless pieces. Darkness and light, indeed, couldn't completely isolate Master Yin's aura, but they could still play some role in slowing down the speed at which he was locked onto. Qin Yu didn't delay at all. He placed Master Yin on the ground and sat down cross-legged to restore his losses. Not long after, Qin Yu awoke from his cultivation state. The old turtle went straight to the point and gave him 2 choices. The first was to draw out Master Yin's soul. There was a high chance he would be able to find out what it was that was attracting the mystic realm soul and form a plan to counter it. But there were risks to doing this. If he wasn't careful, while Master Yin's soul wouldn't scatter away, there was a high chance that his soul would be damaged and he would fall into a daze. Qin Yu looked at Master Yin. As he thought of how Yun Che had knelt down when they parted, he said, "Tell me the second method." The old turtle inwardly curled his lips. He knew that Qin Yu would say something like this. With such a soft-hearted temperament, sooner or later he would suffer a great loss. Although he was dissatisfied, he didn't dare to reveal any of it. The second method is relatively safer, but it will place a great burden on you. Qin Yu had already tried to use the sun and moon force fields to cover Master Yin, but it was ultimately useless. But the old turtle's second method was still related to the sun and moon force fields. In simpler terms, it was to borrow the power of darkness and light to form a dark moon and a scarlet sun. Then, according to a method similar to the sun and moon force fields, he would brand them into Master Yun's body. Although it sounded simple, it was extremely difficult. Moreover, it would cause a tremendous loss to Qin Yu. The old turtle hesitated for a moment before saying, "Master, this mystic realm is not simple. I fear that a fierce battle will be unavoidable in the end. If you use up too much of your strength, there is a high chance you will encounter danger." His words were earnest, as if he were wholeheartedly thinking for Qin Yu. Qin Yu certainly knew that the old turtle was afraid that if something happened to Qin Yu, he would also suffer misfortune. But what he said wasn't wrong. In this mystic realm, there was absolutely a terrifying soul body hidden within. If Qin Yu had just wanted to stop while he was ahead, then that was fine. But since he had locked onto this soul body, a great battle was unavoidable. Moreover, in this current situation, because of Master Yin, even if Qin Yu wanted to stop while he was ahead, the soul body in this mystic realm might not let him go. Qin Yu's eyes flickered with uncertainty. He took a deep breath and said, "I'll use the second method. There isn't much time, so just tell me what to do." A day later, Qin Yu carried Master Yin out of the cave. His complexion was pale, as if he had lost a great deal of blood. His eyes had also dimmed a few degrees. The old turtle's second method had succeeded. The mark of darkness between Master Yun's eyebrows had been replaced by 2 dots, one black and one red. If one looked carefully, they would discover that although these 2 dots were only the size of a pinky finger, they emitted a formidable aura. The dark moon was like an abyss, capable of swallowing all. The red sun was like charcoal. Although it didn't have blazing flames, it could burn all things to ashes. With each other as the dots, they constantly revolved, perfectly fusing the strength of light and darkness together. This was already the limit of what Qin Yu could accomplish. Although he had comprehended the truth of light and darkness as one, understanding and grasping them were 2 completely different matters. Without the help of the old turtle, it would have been impossible for Qin Yu to accomplish this in a single day. But even if he succeeded, condensing the dark moon and red sun, as well as maintaining their existence, the consumption was far greater than he had imagined. In order to continuously extract energy, he had to ensure a constant supply of energy. Otherwise, if the dark moon and red sun collapsed, not only would his aura ceiling fail, but it would also cause severe damage to Master Yin. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. He looked up towards the depths of the mystic realm. The crystal heart he obtained from killing the golden fruit tree was, strictly speaking, also a keepsake. If the lotus flower was the key to entering the mystic realm, then this crystal heart was the pass to find the mystic realm's soul bodies. It seemed to be filtering, selecting the most outstanding and powerful cultivators, and drawing them in step by step. Qin Yu didn't know what the reason was, but there was one thing he could be sure of. The other cultivator of the fire-bathing lineage in the mystic realm would definitely go there. He was the one Qin Yu had chosen to save Master Yun's life. He was also the one who would be sacrificed in exchange for his life. This was the reason why Qin Yu had allowed Yun Che and Zhou Cheng to leave, even though he didn't know that he would face the crazy pursuit of the mystic realm's soul bodies. The rampaging, fire-bathing lineage in Master Yun's body wasn't complete, yet he was already so powerful. The strength of a cultivator with a complete bloodline could be imagined. It wouldn't be simple to take his life. A battle was inevitable. If he was in his peak state, Qin Yu was confident that no one in this mystic realm would be his match. But now he could only be more careful. He would take things one step at a time, looking for the best opportunity to strike and kill with a single strike. He continued on his way. Although there would still be trouble, compared to before, it was a much smoother journey. With the help of the golden crystal heart, Qin Yu could faintly sense the approximate location of the mystic realm's soul bodies. That place was temporarily quiet. Time wasn't tight, and there was no need to hurry. Qin Yu even began to use the time he had to travel to adjust his condition. It was impossible for him to return to his peak state, but he could still erupt with more strength. Every bit of improvement he made now could play a crucial role in determining life or death in a battle. Hooking Soul stood in the shadows. 3 cultivators stood in front of him, 2 men and 1 woman. All of them had dull expressions and empty eyes. He flicked his fingers, and 3 drops of blood flew out. They opened their mouths and swallowed them. Remember this taste. Find the person who has it and tell me where he is. The 2 men and 1 woman bowed. Yes, master. Hooking Soul turned and walked away. The 3 cultivators that were frozen in place suddenly began to shine with light from the depths of their empty eyes. Their entire bodies seemed to come alive. Their complexions changed. They swept their eyes around but didn't notice anything wrong. What happened just now? Why were their memories blank? But they knew that something must have happened. It was just that they couldn't remember what it was. Let's go. The 3 people glanced at each other and then hurried away. No matter what happened, leaving here first was the correct choice. As the 3 hesitant cultivators sped off into the distance, Bewitching Soul stood at the peak of a mountain, his robes fluttering in the wind. His ashen face seemed even colder than before. The puppets had already been laid down. Finding and killing the person with the hooking soul bloodline was only a matter of time. Now it was time to leave. A sharp light flashed in the depths of Hooking Soul's icy eyes. He really did want to know what it was that could cause such a great figure to soar through the clouds of the highest heavens to fight over. If it was really as he guessed. Hooking Soul licked his lips. What was different from his pale blue face was that his tongue was dyed red with blood. Risks were certain. If he were to snatch food from the mouths of these great figures, a single mistake would result in a calamity. But risks and benefits were always equal. He would take things one step at a time. As time passed and the situation changed, he would need to constantly adjust. Thinking too much about it was useless. Schwa! With a single step, Hooking Soul vanished like a wisp of blue smoke. Qin Yu carried Master Cloud on his back. As he looked at the scholar in front of him who was holding a scroll and smiling warmly, he subconsciously tensed up. Between the 2 of them, corpses were strewn all over the ground. Looking at their appearances after they died, it seemed they had killed each other. And the one who had led all of this was the blue-robed scholar in front of him. The 2 looked at each other for a moment. Then the scholar cupped his hands together and bowed. Fellow Taoist, how do you do? This is the first time we meet. I am Wan Jing from Xiangzhang Academy. He was elegant and refined, like 2 scholars meeting on a willow bank. They would admire each other and introduce each other's names to form a friendship. But in the end, that wasn't the case. Now that the ground was littered with corpses and the smell of blood filled the air, Wan Jing's appearance would make one's hair stand on end. Qin Yu returned the greeting. Qin Yu. Wan Jing clapped his hands together, a look of praise on his face. Historical records say that in ancient times there was a great country named Qin. Its strength was tyrannical, and it unified the world. Everything within the universe was its territory, and trillions of lives were ruled over. It was a land of endless prosperity and glory. Your name is truly wonderful. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This was the first time he had heard this. Could this be considered praise? Thinking for a moment, he met Wan Jing's gaze and nodded. Thank you. Towards this blue-robed scholar, Qin Yu didn't want to speak too much. It wasn't because he had killed someone, but because of the dread he felt from the bottom of his heart. From the moment they met until now, his expression had been gentle and cordial, and there wasn't the least bit of hostility in his words. But the more he acted like this, the more uneasy he felt. He always felt as if this person could tear apart his skin at any moment and reveal his fierce claws and teeth. If he didn't want to speak, then he wouldn't. Qin Yu said, "Farewell." He didn't turn around. He drew backwards. Wan Jing lifted a hand. "Sir Qin, please wait a moment. I have a request." As he spoke, he pointed a finger at Teacher Yin. "Because of an accident, my maid went missing, and my only hobby is to read. As the saying goes, adding fragrance to one's sleeves is what I love the most. If Sir Qin is willing to give this woman to me, I will be eternally grateful." Qin Yu said, "I don't want to." Wan Jing frowned. "Sir, are you really not willing to part with her?" Qin Yu's eyes turned cold. "Yes." The air fell silent. After several breaths of time, Wan Jing sighed. "That's fine. Since that's the case, I won't take away what others love. Farewell." He cupped his hands together and walked away. His long sleeves fluttered in the wind, and he exuded an ethereal aura. In several blinks of an eye, he vanished from sight. Qin Yu turned and walked away. Chapter 1181. After changing directions, Qin Yu came to a stop. He turned around without expression. "Wan Jing, if you continue to follow behind me, don't blame me for being impolite." The space was silent. Qin Yu coldly snorted. He lifted a hand and pressed it forward. With a loud bang, space twisted. Within the shaking ripples, a figure appeared. It was Wan Jing, who had just left. He had a look of praise on his face as he clapped his hands, without the slightest bit of embarrassment after being forced out. "Sir Qin's cultivation is quite good. Wan Jing believes that his ability to conceal his aura isn't weak, but I still wasn't able to avoid your senses." Qin Yu was expressionless. "Give me an explanation." An icy cold aura broke out from his body, as sharp as a blade. Wan Jing's smile became even brighter. "Sir Qin, please calm your anger. I was wrong in this matter, but I do like the woman behind you." He lifted his palm and light surged. This is something Wan Jing obtained after killing a fierce monster plant. Its core contains a formidable soul strength. In addition, it is likely a keepsake that points to the greatest lucky chance in this mystic realm. He paused for a moment and continued to say, "If Sir Qin agrees to part with her, this can be considered compensation. It will not disappoint you." Qin Yu could immediately determine that the golden bead in Wan Jing's palm was of the same quality as the crystal he obtained after killing the golden fruit tree. He wasn't lying. Moreover, strictly speaking, he was extremely sincere. After all, to kill a monster plant on the same level as the golden fruit tree wasn't an easy matter. This thing was extremely precious. But Qin Yu already had a similar keepsake. Even if he didn't, he still wouldn't agree. Although Qin Yu thought this, he didn't immediately refuse. He stared at the bead several times and said, "I want to know why you are doing this." Before Wan Jing could speak, Qin Yu sneered. "You don't need to say things like you find her pleasing to the eye or you like her." Wan Jing faintly smiled. He thought for a moment and said, "In truth, I can't say for sure, but I always feel that there is something special about this young lady that I'm interested in." Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. "You aren't telling the truth." Wan Jing said, "Young Master Qin, what do I have to do to make you believe?" He suddenly shut his mouth and didn't speak. His smiling face now revealed a trace of gloominess. "Young Master Qin, you want to get information from me? You have already decided to reject my deal." Of course, it wasn't a question. Qin Yu met his gaze and nodded. That's right. He dreaded Wan Jing and didn't want to come into conflict with him, but that didn't mean he feared him. Even if he wasn't at his peak, he was confident that he would be the one laughing in the end if they were to fight. Moreover, his intuition told him that he couldn't show the slightest bit of cowardice at this moment. The tougher his attitude was, the more likely it was that he would be able to avoid setbacks. The smile on Wan Jing's face completely vanished. His facial features were elegant and refined. When he smiled, he gave off an incomparably amiable feeling. But when he was gloomy, he seemed exceptionally cold and solemn. Good, very good. He deeply looked at Qin and took a step back. Then, as if he had fallen into water, he vanished from sight. He didn't say anything more. He only left the sentence behind and left decisively. Qin, you could confirm that Wan Jing had truly left. But his complexion didn't relax at all. Rather, it became even more dignified. On the surface, this matter seemed to have ended with Wan Jing retreating. But in reality, both sides were already standing on opposite sides. It was only because he feared Qin Yu's strength that he didn't attack. If they were to meet again in the future, they would be enemies. If there was a chance, Wan Jing would attack without hesitation and throw Qin Yu into the abyss. This was truly a disaster knocking on one's door on the road. Everything was fine, and yet he had provoked such a tyrannical enemy. Qin Yu felt a bit depressed, but he soon suppressed it. At the very least, through this matter, he had confirmed his speculations. Master Yin really did have an attribute he hadn't noticed before. It was this attribute that caused the mystic realm's soul body to chase after him relentlessly, provoking Wan Jing to fall out with him. Just what was it? Qin Yu was incomparably curious, but now clearly wasn't the time to express his curiosity. After waiting for a moment and making sure that Wan Jing hadn't returned, Qin Yu shot up into the skies. If he thought about it carefully, if he wanted to kill the cultivators of the Bathing Fire clan to save Master Yin, he would have to kill the female corpse of the Sly Life clan. That would also bring about trouble. And there was also Wan Jing from Xiangzhang Academy. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. His recent luck didn't seem to be too good. He was about to provoke one of the tyrannical cultivators of the mystic realm. Ba. Don't randomly choose a target. There was already enough trouble on his hands. If he provoked a few more, he would have to seriously consider what position he should use when escaping. Qin Yu was confident in his own strength, but he wouldn't be arrogant. Just how vast was the vast young world? Even if he had many lucky chances and good fortune, that didn't mean there were no people stronger than him. Wan Jing was a good example. Although he didn't attack in the end and took the initiative to retreat, Qin Yu could still feel an intense aura coming from his body. Shaking his head, Qin Yu shook these thoughts away. He chose a new direction and rapidly flew away. Wan Jing, who hadn't fallen out with Qin Yu, had fallen out with another person. Terrifying fluctuations of strength wildly shook the air, tumbling like a tide. Sword energy swept out, cutting down without end. Space was torn apart, and tiny cracks appeared. An icy voice sounded out from the endless sword phantoms. Wan Jing, if you continue to act crazily, don't blame me for being impolite. With his voice, a sword cry sounded out, instantly suppressing all the howling sword intent. Sharp, overbearing, all-conquering. Bang! Wan Jing lifted a hand to shatter the sword light. His figure flashed backwards. He let out a long breath, a smile on his face. Nice, this feels great. Across from him, the countless sword phantoms instantly converged, submerging into a person's body. His sword was unsheathed a foot, his eyes cold and firm. His gaze fell on Wan Jing, and he said, "You were defeated by someone." His voice was cold and hard. It was clear he wasn't good with words, but one could clearly sense the surprise in his voice. Wan Jing nodded. "A strange fellow. I've never seen him before. He was very strong." He pulled out a book from his waist and patted it. "No, he was very strong." The sword cultivator's eyes brightened. He and Wan Jing were old acquaintances, and they even had some friendship. Otherwise, the battle just now wouldn't have ended so easily. Of course, it wasn't that their friendship was so deep that they could reconcile after falling out. The main reason was that neither of them could do anything to the other. Even if they fought, it would only be a waste of time and energy. But the sword cultivator had a deep understanding of Ruanjing. This was a person who seemed gentle and elegant on the outside, but was actually a madman on the inside. And a madman was usually a mixture of pride and ruthlessness. Ruanjing was especially so. To be able to defeat Ruanjing and still be able to retreat unscathed, and even make him not dare to directly attack. This was absolutely a powerhouse. Sword player, let's cooperate. Ruanjing smiled. If I am alone, I don't have the confidence to deal with Qinyu. Oh, Qinyu is the fellow I just mentioned. As a direct disciple of the Heavenly Sword sect, he was known as a genius of the sword that only appeared once every 10,000 years. If anyone else dared to call Ling Xiao this, they would surely die a miserable death. But Ruanjing had always called him this from the very beginning. The reason he could still jump around and even make Ling Xiao ignore him was because he was strong enough and his background was deep enough. Xiangzhang Academy's name wasn't too resounding, but its strength was terrifying. It had been passed down for countless years and had always been on par with the Heavenly Sword sect. Not interested. Ling Xiao turned and walked away. Ruanjing loudly said, I know you are proud and you always kill people yourself, but this time is different. I am very interested in the woman on Qinyu's back. He coughed. Of course, it's not because of that, but because it is related to this mystic realm. Ling Xiao turned. Really? Ruanjing said, Of course. If it weren't for that, why would I provoke Qinyu when I know he is tyrannically strong? Ling Xiao fell silent. When he killed people, no matter how weak or strong the enemy was, he would always cut off their heads with his sword. This was his choice and also his way of the sword. Teaming up with others didn't go against his original intentions. But he certainly knew what was special about Ruanjing. When one cultivated Xiangzhang Academy Skyheart insight to large success, they could communicate with the heavens and earth and obtain all sorts of mysterious hints. Ruanjing must have received a warning from the heavens and earth that he shouldn't be enemies with Qinyu. Thus, he came to cooperate with him. Ling Xiao looked up. I will kill him. You capture that woman. Ruanjing smiled. I knew you would say that. No problem. Afterwards, we will play a game of rock, paper, scissors to decide the profits. Okay. Unbeknownst to everyone else, Qinyu finally arrived at the place that the crystal heart pointed him to. It was a mountain. When Qinyu saw its appearance, he was stunned. This was because its appearance was exactly the same as the carrier of the mystic realm in the land of chaos. It was also a stalactite-like mountain. Its surface was incomparably smooth, forming a sharp contrast with the surrounding lush forests. When Qinyu saw this mountain, he couldn't help but think, could it be that the one who entered today was a realm within a realm? This sort of situation also existed in the land of chaos. But not only were they few in number, but the level of the mystic realm wasn't high either. The reason was simple. The existence of a realm within a realm had extremely strict requirements. The higher the level of the mystic realm, the greater the strength it contained and the more difficult it was to form. But if it really was a realm within a realm, then Qinyu would have to seriously consider the degree of danger in this mystic realm. Several gazes fell on Qinyu from afar, cold and indifferent. There was also a bit of unconcealable surprise in their eyes. Those that could come here were mostly cultivators from the third floor of the ship. Even if they didn't know each other, they had at least met each other before and knew some information about each other. But Qinyu was clearly not one of them. In particular, he was carrying the unconscious Master Yin on his back. This caused the gazes that fell on him to become even more strange. Qinyu had already sensed these gazes. He was well aware that he wasn't the first person to arrive here. But since these people only watched from afar and didn't have any intention of provoking him, Qinyu was happy to have some peace and quiet. In this current situation, it was unknown what would happen in the end. Preserving his strength was certainly the best choice. Qinyu's figure flickered, and he landed on a thick ancient tree. He chose a spacious area, untied Master Yin, and sat down cross-legged beside him. Qin Yu had already memorized the aura of the fire-bathing lineage. None of the cultivators here were from it. They hadn't arrived yet. This was also good. Qin Yu could make some more preparations. In addition to this, his chances of success would be higher. It was just that there were many cultivators here, and none of them were easy to deal with. How to deal with them was also a problem. It would be best if he could fish in troubled waters. Otherwise, after a great battle, he would become the cicada in the mouth of the oriole. In the blink of an eye, a day passed. Several more waves of cultivators arrived. As they saw the mountain outside, their complexions changed. Qin Yu casually swept his eyes over them. Since he couldn't find his target, he simply ignored them. At this moment, the unconscious Yin Shi suddenly began writhing about, and groans of agony escaped from his mouth. Between her eyebrows, the dark moon and crimson sun slowed down, showing signs of instability. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her into his arms, his sharp eyes sweeping around. The reason Master Yun's bloodline backlash had suddenly intensified was likely because she was influenced by external factors. Rumble, rumble. In the next moment, there was the sound of breaking air. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. In the skies, a blazing flame came howling down like a meteor. With just a glance, Qin Yu knew that the cultivator in this flame was the one he was waiting for. He was originally worried that this person would restrain his aura, but now it seemed he had been worrying too much. As long as he killed this person and fused with his bloodline, Master Yin would be able to survive. The flames fell to the ground. The earth rumbled and sunk in. Scorched earth splashed out in all directions, and the temperature in the air rapidly rose. The bald, burning wind walked out from the pit. As if sensing something, he turned to look at Qin Yu. Their gazes collided in the air. Chapter 1182. There were no sparks flying in all directions, nor were there any tit-for-tat confrontations. Flaming Wind and Qin Yu looked at each other for several breaths of time before withdrawing their gazes. But through this glance, Qin Yu was able to determine one thing. Burning Wind had already sensed some sort of aura from Master Yun's body. Most likely, it had something to do with the sudden agitation of the berserk bloodline in Yun Shi's body. Most likely, it was due to the resonance between the two bloodlines. This was unexpected. But perhaps it was because of the shielding effects of the dark moon and crimson sun that Burning Wind didn't sense his complete aura, or perhaps it was because he dreaded Qin Yu's existence. For the time being, nothing happened between the two sides. But once there was a chance, Qin Yu believed that Burning Wind would definitely make a move. Sure enough, plans couldn't keep up with changes. After this matter, it was impossible for Qin Yu to scheme against him. However, this was how the world was. Not everything would progress according to your expectations. There would always be changes and accidents. If he could accept it, he would accept it. If he couldn't, he could only accept it. Qin Yu couldn't help but feel a bit helpless. But he soon composed himself. Since the situation had changed, he had to change his previous strategy. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to save Yun Shi. On the other hand, Yun Shi was likely to be the key to suppressing the primordial spirit of the myriad and hive nest. Flaming Wind of the lineage of fire looked into Qin Yu's eyes, and it did not escape the eyes of the surrounding cultivators. When they saw the two of them avert their gazes, they immediately felt disappointed. There were too many opponents, and the treasures in the mystic realm were destined to be limited. Of course, they would be happy to see a few of them being eliminated in a fight to the death. Unfortunately, they weren't stupid, and they wouldn't allow others to take advantage of them. At this moment, they did not know that the disappointment in their hearts would soon be dispelled. Even Qin Yu didn't expect that just as he was thinking about how he could kill this Baldy and save Master Yin, someone would already want his life. Whoosh! The sound of air being torn apart could be heard. The vast and endless sword shadows appeared at the end of one's line of sight. Their speed was astonishing, and their auras were monstrous. Heaven-reaching sword cultivator. Outside the secret realm, a cultivator released a low roar, his face revealing restraining fear. In terms of battle prowess, sword cultivators were definitely one of the strongest existences among cultivators. On the other hand, the heavenly sword Dao emphasized on killing with a single strike. It was the most ruthless and overbearing, taking the life of a person with a single strike. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, there were very few cultivators that were willing to provoke a heaven-piercing sword cultivator that could take one's life. Qin Yu! Suddenly, a cold shout came from the endless sword shadows. Burning Wind's heart stirred. Without any reason, he subconsciously looked up and his eyes fell on Qin Yu. His intuition told him that Ling Zhao's target was this person. Bang! Torrential sword shadows slashed down brazenly. The extremely sharp sword intent swept out majestically, as if it was going to split the secret realm itself. Ran Feng's eyes were bright. It really was him. Qin Yu lifted a hand and punched out. Wherever his fist landed, space twisted. It was like a boulder had fallen into a lake, causing turbulent waves to surge. It charged out in all directions, wrapping up the numerous sword shadows that were slashing down on him. The sword shadow collided with the distorted space, and a low rumbling sound rang out continuously. It was like thunder exploding in the depths of the earth, causing people's hearts to tremble. Ling Zhao's figure appeared. As he looked at Qin Yu, who was withdrawing his fist atop the ancient tree, a fierce fighting spirit surged in his eyes. You really are strong. Although his previous sword strike was meant to probe, it was still full of murderous intent. Even an original God realm cultivator wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. Qin Yu hurriedly attacked. His fist shook the void, forming waves that swallowed all. Just this strike alone was extraordinary. Who are you? Heaven-span sword sex Ling Zhao. His tone was icy cold. He cupped his hands together. Please enlighten me. Bang! The sword in his hand left its sheath. The humming of the sword instantly reverberated through the world. Outside the secret realm, the scattered cultivators all stared with wide eyes. Their excitement couldn't be concealed. If the cultivators that entered the land of chaos were ranked according to their fame, then Ling Zhao's name wasn't in the top 3. But in terms of unparalleled combat strength and bloodthirsty killing intent, he was undoubtedly one of the most terrifying existences. After being chosen by Ling Zhao, no one was optimistic about Qin Yu's fate. This was the impression that the sword cultivators of Heaven-span Sword Sect had left on everyone through their glorious battle achievements. But they were still shaken. This was because Ling Zhao had drawn his sword. It had to be known that ever since Ling Zhao revealed his brilliance, the number of times he had drawn his sword could be counted on one hand. Every person that died beneath Ling Zhao's sword was an absolute powerhouse. But most of the time, it was only after the battle that Ling Zhao's fighting spirit was aroused that he drew his sword. But today, before the battle had even begun, Ling Zhao had already drawn his sword. Then there was only one explanation. His opponent was strong. So strong that even someone as arrogant as a Heaven-span Sword Sect cultivator had to bring out his full strength. Kill. Kill with everything you have. It would be best if both sides were wounded. As for why the two of them were fighting, no one knew, nor did they want to know. As long as the result was beneficial to them, it was fine. Qin Yu's complexion was ugly. It wasn't that he feared the sword cultivator in front of him, but that this inexplicable battle would ruin all of his plans. What was the reason? They had never met before. So why was Ling Zhao able to immediately call out his name and fight him without hesitation? For Ling Zhao to have his current cultivation, he definitely wasn't an idiot. Could it be that he didn't know that if he fought with Qin Yu right now, he would only be taken advantage of unless there was enough benefit that he was willing to take the risk? Qin Yu's eyes fell on the unconscious Master Yin, and his complexion darkened. He coldly said, "Wan Jing, come out." With a chuckle, space twisted and a figure walked out. It was the blue-robed Ruan Jing, who held a scroll in his hand and had a gentle and elegant aura. As he looked at Qin Yu, his eyes were full of praise. Sir Qin is truly a smart person. I, Ruan Jing, like to make friends with smart people the most. If you are willing to agree to our previous transaction, we can immediately bury the hatchet and become a legend. What does Sir Qin think? It really was him. Qin Yu felt a bit of regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have taken the risk to kill this person on the spot the first time they met. Today he had joined forces with the Heavenspan Sword Sect cultivators. Perhaps things were about to spiral out of control. Agreeing was impossible. A ruthless light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. If this was the case, then he could only take a risk. Bang! In response to Ruan Jing, Qin Yu roared out and punched out. The phantom of a void abyss titan appeared behind him, rearing its head back and roaring. Ruan Jing's complexion changed. He crossed his arms and placed the scroll in front of him. In the next moment, a terrifying explosion erupted. A golden page flew out from the scroll. It combusted on its own, leaving behind surging blue words. Space collapsed and Ruan Jing was sent flying away. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with anger. He had indeed felt an intense threat from Qin Yu. Otherwise, he wouldn't have avoided him on his own initiative. But today, the might of this punch had far surpassed his expectations. It had actually forced the Academy's supreme treasure to damage a page in order to protect him. Bang! The long sword roared. Ling Xiao walked forwards without expression. Qin Yu, your opponent is me. He raised his hand and slashed out with his sword. There was no change in space, but an extremely strange and terrifying feeling welled up in the hearts of all the cultivators who witnessed this sword. It was as if, as his sword fell, everything would be cut open and neatly split in half. Or even themselves. The moment this thought appeared, a trace of fear exploded in their hearts. They subconsciously took a step back, and all the cultivators revealed looks of horror. What a terrifying sword strike! Burning Wind had a dignified expression. The depths of his eyes were crimson red, as if countless flames were burning within them. From this sword strike, he could feel a near-fatal threat. Sky-piercing sword cultivator. He truly lived up to his reputation. This person would be one of his most terrifying opponents in the mystic realm. Could this be an opportunity? After Ling Xiao killed Qin Yu, he would inevitably fall into a weakened state because of the loss. Burning Wind remained calm. The flames burning in his eyes quietly blazed even hotter. That's right, in the eyes of the descendants of the fire-bathing lineage, it was only natural for the sky-piercing sword cultivator who had slashed out such a terrifying sword strike to kill Qin Yu. Even if he was strong enough, this was because the level of this sword strike had risen to a boundary that neared the Tao. It was because of this that everyone who saw it felt such a terrifying feeling. Their strength might be equal, but the disparity in boundary could produce an astonishing eruption of strength. How could Qin Yu not die? It wasn't just Burning Wind who thought this. At this time, outside of the mystic realm, nearly every cultivator had the same thought. But Ling Xiao was an exception. This was the sky-piercing sword cultivator who had personally slashed out a terrifying sword strike and shocked the minds of all cultivators. As he looked at Qin Yu across from him, he didn't know why he didn't relax at all. Instead, as this sword slashed out, his mind became increasingly solemn, and there was even an invisible feeling of being suppressed. This sort of feeling was something he had never felt ever since he had glimpsed the gate and stepped into the path of the sword. Qin Yu attacked. Facing this sword strike that could pierce through all he did was raise his hand and point forwards. In the abyss, Qin Yu viewed the world. He saw the skies of the abyss and also the source of the abyss. Of course, he wasn't Liao Shi, and he couldn't see clearly, but this didn't mean he didn't gain anything. He entered the deepest depths of the abyss, passed through the terrifying cold sea, entered the all-destroying vortex, and found light born in its depths. Then he found the passage back to Vastyong. In that passage, Qin Yu was placed between two great worlds. He was imprisoned by light and darkness, and he comprehended light and darkness as one. However, he didn't tell anyone that when he understood light and darkness, another terrifying thought emerged uncontrollably from the bottom of his heart. Vast Yang and the Abyss, these two opposing worlds. Just what sort of relationship did they have? If any cultivator who knew of the existence of Vast Yang and the Abyss were to learn of this, they would surely regard Qin Yu as a madman. These were two completely opposing worlds, their attributes like fire and water. Of course, they could only be mortal enemies. But reality told Qin Yu that the thought that appeared in his mind was likely true. This was because what he obtained from observing the world in the abyss was still effective even after returning to Vast Yang. He could even feel that beneath the surface of the two worlds, there was an essential similarity between them. Of course, it wasn't completely the same, but to the current Qin Yu, it was more than enough. If a sword strike from a heaven-spanned sword cultivator could be said to be incomparably terrifying, as if all living things in the world would be cut to pieces, then Qin Yu's finger was absolutely ruthless and terrifying. Then this finger of Qin Yu's was absolutely ruthless and terrifying. It could strike everything into the abyss of annihilation. As his fingertip fell, a clear fingerprint appeared in space. It shattered space, turning it pitch black. Then, with this fingerprint as the center, cracks spread out in all directions. Then, an incomparably horrifying scene appeared. Space began to break apart, and this wasn't a small area. Like a mirror falling to the ground, it instantly shattered into countless pieces, forming a black space storm. It roared out like a broken dam. The spatial fragments wrapped around it were like pieces of ice, roaring out together with it, tearing everything to pieces. Qin Yu had a finger. Its name was the Azure Point. It could summon the wind and rain. It could summon heroic spirits. It could change the world. But in the end, this finger had transformed into a secret art of the Tao of space. Or, to be more precise, it was a slaughter art of the Tao of space. Perhaps in terms of pure strength, the Azure Point finger wasn't too powerful. But what it touched upon was the space laws that existed in all things. Thus, there was the horrifying scene of Qin Yu pointing out his finger and space shattering with a roar like a broken dam. A terrifying sword strike that could split apart the heavens, and Earth sank into the space storm. Heaven-shaking rumbles echoed out before everything finally calmed down. It wasn't that the power of the space storm could easily destroy it, but that this terrifying sword strike had been banished by the space laws. Perhaps it had appeared in another, distant world, releasing the remnants of its terrifying might. But this no longer had anything to do with Qin Yu. At this moment, the world fell silent. Countless pairs of eyes locked onto Qin Yu, their eyes wide with shock and horror. It was like they had seen a ghost. Of the cultivators that could appear here, none of them were mediocre. In fact, they could even be called outstanding elites. They didn't lack in strength or vision. They certainly knew what Qin Yu's strike represented. The space laws. They were known to be second only to the Tao of time, a great Tao with unparalleled might. Vast Yang contained countless worlds, large and small like a chessboard. They were like islands dotting the vast sea. The divine realm cultivators within were like grains of sand in the eternal sea. They all had the qualifications to cultivate the great Tao of rules. But how many of them could touch upon the space laws? Let alone divine realm cultivators. Even formidable original divinity realm cultivators that could perceive the space laws were extremely rare. But there was one thing that was without a doubt. Any cultivator that could perceive the space laws would be far stronger than those at the same level, and they would also have enviable potential. Today, it could be said that proud children of heaven had gathered in this mystic realm, but none of them were lucky enough to be able to control the power of space. This, how could anyone not be shocked? Space laws. In the void world, one of the several figures spoke out, his voice shaking. When one cultivated to their level, When there was no way forward, they began to understand just how terrifying the space and time laws were. Most importantly, besides great power, the space and time laws represented a kind of future potential. The Tao of time was ethereal. Besides rulers, almost no one could control it. As for the space great Tao, the several gathered here were only at the beginning. And this was because they had the help of their realms. They were able to connect with the heavens and earth, slowly accumulating their gains. It was completely different from directly comprehending it. There was almost no potential for growth, and it would be difficult to advance in the future. Everyone, if you hand this person to me, I am willing to withdraw from today's struggle, a figure slowly said. Just as he finished speaking, there was a cold laugh in everyone's ears. Venerable Xian's plan is quite good. Does he think that we don't know the value of the space laws? The spirit bodies of the profound bright world, even if they fully mature, cannot compare to the space laws in terms of value. The void world fell silent. No one spoke, but their eyes were filled with heat. Chapter 1183. Qin Yu didn't know that because of the azure finger, many eyes had locked onto him and he had triggered the greatest crisis of his life. If he didn't handle this matter properly, what awaited him would be an incomparably miserable fate. Of course, this was all in the future. Right now, as he stared at the sword cultivator across from him, he could feel fear in his eyes. Even someone as strong as the sword cultivator with a firm was intimidated by the power of space that Qin Yu erupted with. The other cultivators couldn't avoid it, and this was Qin Yu's goal. In order to seal away Master Yun's aura and extend her life, he was far from his peak condition. Once he fell into a fierce battle with the sword cultivator, there was a high chance of complications occurring. Moreover, there was also Xiangzhang Academy's Ruan Jing, who was watching from the side. From how he gathered the sword cultivator to join forces with him, one could see this person's character. He was absolutely capable of bullying others with numbers. In order to intimidate everyone, they wouldn't dare to recklessly attack. As long as he could persist until his soul manifested in the mystic realm, everyone's attention would be diverted away. In normal circumstances, Qin Yu's plan had a high chance of success. It could even be said that with things having reached this step, he was already halfway to success. But what he didn't know was that many years ago, because of an accidental harvest, Ruan Jing had also touched upon the surface of the space laws. Since it was only the surface, it was extremely shallow and couldn't provide any substantial help to his strength. But the space laws were the space laws. After this matter was confirmed, it was immediately sealed off, and Ruan Jing became one of the core disciples of Xiangzhang Academy. It was only by pouring resources into his cultivation that he had his current cultivation. The only regret was that Ruan Jing's space laws were obtained through an external object. Although he had diligently cultivated them these past years, he hadn't been able to cross the threshold. Even he himself, as the years passed, gradually gave up on his ambition to truly control the space laws. But now, in Qin Yu's battle with Ling Xiao, Ruan Jing actually saw a strike of the space laws. In that moment, as everyone fell into a state of shock, a flame ignited in his heart, crazily burning his mind. Kill Qin Yu and take away his space laws. If it were anyone else, it would be nearly impossible to succeed. But Ruan Jing had a chance. Even if the chances weren't high, it was enough for Ruan Jing to risk everything. So, as Qin Yu awed all the cultivators outside the mountain, Ruan Jing brazenly attacked. His target was Qin Yu, but his target was the unconscious Yunshi. Qin Yu valued her enough to be a powerful bargaining chip. It would be difficult for him to kill Qin Yu by himself, but there was no lack of powerhouses here. And the premise was that he needed enough benefits to drive them to surround and kill Qin Yu. After all, if he wasn't able to kill an enemy that had grasped the laws of space today, then it would definitely become a great calamity for him in the future. Yunshi was the key. Bang! Space suddenly collapsed, swallowing Master Yin within. Before Qin Yu could even react in anger, Ruan Jing actually dared to move. She thrust a hand in and pulled Master Yin out. In front of a cultivator who had grasped the laws of space, using spatial means to capture someone was naturally an extremely foolish thing to do. But in reality, Wan Jing had done it on purpose. He only wanted to attract the attention of the crowd, not to capture Master Yin. Everyone, Wan Jing swears on the honor of Zhang Academy that this woman beside Qin Yu is hiding an enormous secret on her body. It is something that you and I both want to obtain in this mystic realm. If we don't take this woman away or kill her, then we're destined to gain nothing in this secret realm. Everyone's complexions changed. He swore on the honor of Zhang Academy that Wan Jing wouldn't dare to speak nonsense. Otherwise, even he wouldn't be able to withstand the consequences. And more importantly, besides this possibility, no one could figure out why Wan Jing would act at this time. After all, everyone had witnessed Qin use strength with their own eyes. Unless he had nowhere else to retreat, he had no other choice. Most cultivators didn't understand why this trip to the land of chaos had attracted so many famous young powerhouses. But in the end, there are some people who knew some inside information. And what was even more coincidental was that almost everyone who knew was gathered here. Thinking back to the strict instructions they had received before leaving, it was easy for them to understand Wan Jing must have made some sort of promise or obtained the promise of some great figure. Only then would he be willing to take such a risk. With this as a background, everyone believed most of Wan Jing's words. If this wasn't the case, then why would Qin Yu keep bringing an unconscious woman with him? He must have known about it. Then, everyone's eyes turned dignified. Qin Yu cursed inwardly. He hadn't hesitated to expose the space laws to intimidate everyone. But if it involved his own interests, then that was a different test. None of these people in front of him dared to face him alone. But what if they joined forces? The space laws were strong, but they weren't strong enough to completely roll over them. And as he thought, Qin Yu could feel a trace of eagerness in the dignified eyes of those around him. If they didn't have something as profound as the space laws, then why would he have it? This involved some dark thoughts, but they still existed. Moreover, they were one of the most important factors influencing everyone's decision. Wan Jing was well aware that everyone was tempted. The only thing they lacked now was a turning point. Just as he was secretly clenching his teeth, not hesitating to take the risk of being the first to attack and surround Qin Yu, someone else spoke up. This voice was cold and gloomy. Qin Yu, you actually dared to kill someone from my Sly Fate clan. No matter who you are, you must die. Traces of blood-red light gushed out from nothingness, circling around Qin Yu. They constantly twisted, condensing into fierce ghost faces. On the back of Qin Yu's hand, the blood mole that had shrunk to a point was activated. Countless blood runes drilled out and wildly spread outwards. At the same time, a horrifying feeling erupted from the depths of his heart. In the next moment, an extremely cold Yin aura exploded in his soul. Like howling ice blades, they wanted to cut Qin Yu's soul into countless pieces and sever all his life force. With a stuffy cough, Qin Yu's complexion paled. He spat out a mouthful of blood and punched out. His fist collided with the palm that drilled out from space. There was a stuffy cough, and an explosion occurred. The pale-faced, hooking soul was sent tumbling backwards. He stared at Qin Yu, shock in his eyes. Soul treasure! The strength that broke into Qin Yu's soul only erupted for a moment before it lost contact with him. Hooking soul licked his lips, his tongue turning even redder. Wan Jing, let's join forces to kill him. I only want this treasure. The Sly Fate clan was known to control the fate of life and death. And all of this was established on the basis that one had a sufficiently powerful soul. If he could obtain the soul treasure in Qin Yu's hands, Hooking Soul was confident his strength would rise to another level in a short period of time. He might even be able to touch upon the Yamaking realm. I don't care who the soul treasure belongs to, but, fellow Taoist Qin Yu, you must explain why the woman beside you has the bloodline of my fire-bathing clan flowing through her body. The bald, burning wind stepped forwards, staring at Master Yun in Qin Yu's arms. Because she had been ambushed by the sly Fate clan's soul-severing technique just now, there had been a pause in the supply of strength, and the revolving of the dark moon and crimson sun had also stopped. Although she had quickly recovered, there was still a trace of her aura that Burning Wind had captured. He was finally able to determine that the aura he felt in that mountain valley that day was that of Master Yin. And Qin Yu was that mysterious and unknown powerhouse. The situation suddenly reversed. From the moment Wan Jing attacked, in a short period of time, 3 cultivators had stepped forward in front of Qin Yu. Xiangzhang Academy's Wan Jing, Sly Fate Clan's Hooking Soul, fire-bathing lineage's Burning Wind. If one were to be added on top of the sky-split sword sex-ling Xiao, who had cooperated with Wan Jing, then nearly all of the peak powerhouses here had taken action. The atmosphere changed once more. Qin Yu was strong, but no matter how strong he was, there was absolutely no way he could contend with 4 proud sons of heaven joining forces. In other words, there was a high probability that today he would die. As the saying went, when a wall was down, everyone would push on it, when a broken drum would be beaten by others. Everyone that originally had a bit of fear in their hearts now had icy coldness appear in their eyes. In the end, killing Qin Yu was in line with everyone's interests. Feeling the icy gazes on him, Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He never expected that the situation would develop to this step. Even if he risked his life, he didn't think he could contend with these people in front of him. Even if he could kill a few of them, it would be hard for him to escape death in the end. The voice of the old turtle suddenly sounded out in his mind. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He stepped forwards and laughed. This sudden action left everyone startled. They didn't know what Qin Yu meant, and their movements paused for a moment. It looks like everyone has made up their mind to surround and kill me today? Then bring it on. Qin Yu's laughter faded. He roared out loud. I certainly cannot kill everyone here today, but dragging a few people to the grave with me isn't difficult at all. Killing intent overflowed in all directions. From these words, everyone could feel an incomparably thick and nearly tangible blood stench. Their complexions changed once more. Even Burning Wind and Hooking Soul, who were standing in front, subconsciously shrank their pupils, revealing a trace of vigilance. Moreover, no matter what background Qin Yu came from, for his cultivation to reach his current level, he inevitably had a stroke of luck. Who knew what cards he had in his hands? On the surface, it looked like he was at a disadvantage and there was no way he could escape from being surrounded and killed. But if he really was in a hopeless situation, it was hard to say whether or not he would be dragged down with him. In particular, it was because of their stance that the situation had worsened, causing Qin Yu to end up in his current state. If he had to say who he hated the most, it would be them. Wan Jing cursed inwardly. This group of fellows had actually been frightened by Qin Yu's crude methods. If everyone joined forces to kill him, just how many methods could Qin Yu use? Before he could even counterattack, he would be killed on the spot. He took a deep breath. Just as he was about to wake everyone up, he saw Qin Yu suddenly lift a hand and point a finger at him. Wan Jing had personally witnessed the might of the boundless blue finger and the chaotic flows of space that it caused. The more he envied it, the more he feared it. His complexion changed, and he stormed backwards. But everything remained calm, as if nothing had happened. Qin Yu had simply pointed at him. Wan Jing's face alternated between white and blue. Qin Yu lightly said, I'll remember you. Wan Jing's complexion changed. This is bad. He wants to escape. His reaction was quick, but it was already too late. Qin Yu's lips curved up in a cold sneer. As he spoke, he had already rushed out. Contrary to everyone's expectations, he didn't flee. Instead, he carried Master Cloud on his back and flew towards the mountain in the sea. Kacha! A crack appeared on the surface of the mountain. Qin Yu and Master Cloud instantly submerged within. Chapter 1184. Before this, Qin Yu was worried that if he really was in a boundary within a boundary, then he would have to reevaluate the dangers and be more careful. But when he was sure of this, he was the first to enter the realm within the realm when it first opened. This was the so-called ever-changing affairs of the world. After all, if he hadn't rushed in, he wouldn't have been far from death. The moment he flew into the crack, Qin Yu had made countless assumptions about what would happen next. But he never expected that what awaited him would be a blow to the head. There was a buzzing sound in his head, like it was wrapped in several layers of cloth and pressed down by a large stone. It was heavy and oppressive. This was a suppression on the level of the soul, forcing all of his senses back into his body. Before Qin Yu could adapt to this discomfort, there was a light pop and he felt as if he had landed on solid ground. He had already entered. A moment later, Qin Yu was able to determine that he was in a maze. That's right, this was a maze. At this time, Qin Yu was standing at a turning point in a passage. This passage branched off into countless forks, each one going in a different direction. And Qin Yu had made similar choices several times before. Every fork looked the same on the surface. In a situation where his divine sense couldn't leave his body, he could only rely on his eyes and intuition. Or, to put it more bluntly, he relied on luck. This was because what the eyes could see wasn't necessarily correct. Moreover, these passages weren't straight, but curved. What the naked eye could see was only a small distance. Which direction should he go? Qin Yu looked around, but didn't find anything. Since there was no way to choose, he could only follow his intuition. But this time his intuition was wrong. Not long after entering the passage, Qin Yu heard a light, buzzing sound in his ears. His complexion changed. Without hesitation, he exerted strength in his feet and his speed instantly rose. In the next moment, where Qin Yu was originally standing, the walls of the passage cracked open. Dark yellow mosquitoes with dark red eyes rushed out. They indeed looked like mosquitoes, but their bodies had expanded dozens of times. Each one was the size of an adult's fist, and they had long and sharp mouthparts that flashed with an icy cold light. Pairs of dark red eyes locked onto the wildly running Qin Yu. Their eyes were ice cold and their killing intent nearly condensed into essence. Hum! Their wings rapidly flapped, humming in the air. The mosquitoes rushed out like lightning. Qin Yu soon discovered that with his current speed it was impossible for him to escape. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He stepped forwards, causing the tunnel to shake. But it was unknown just what sort of material it was made of, but it didn't shatter under Qin Yu's attack. In fact, there wasn't even a crack on it. But this didn't mean that Qin Yu's kick was ineffective. Rather, it caused the might of this strike to be greatly enhanced. The force that entered the passageway was rebounded, hitting the other side of the passageway, forming a second rebound, then a third, a fourth. Although the force would be weakened with each rebound, its power was still considerable. This gave rise to many intersecting and shaking waves in the tunnel, swallowing up all the flying mosquitoes that were chasing him. As it turned out, mosquitoes were just mosquitoes. Even if their bodies expanded dozens of times, they still couldn't get rid of their weak nature. In the blink of an eye, countless flying mosquitoes were smashed into pieces by the shock waves. The smell of blood permeated the air. Surprise flashed in his eyes. The strength of these mosquitoes was far weaker than he had imagined, but he could clearly feel a threat from them. Otherwise, when he heard the buzzing sound, he wouldn't have accelerated to escape without hesitation. If it was only at this level, then what did it matter if there were 10 times more of them? He could easily take them all in with a few punches and kicks. But soon, Qin Yu's complexion changed. This was because the smell of blood in the air was rapidly weakening. Not only that, but the scarlet color that filled the air was also rapidly fading, as if it was being absorbed by something. Then there was a series of muffled pu sounds, like the sound of a long knife that was not very sharp cutting into thick cowhide, revealing a sense of difficulty. There was nothing in the tunnel except for the flying mosquitoes that were chasing him. This sound was naturally the sound of the shock waves tearing them apart. But this sound hadn't been there before. In other words, in a short period of time, the physical strength of these flying mosquitoes had increased at an astonishing rate. Thinking about the disappearance of the smell of blood and blood in the air, Qin Yu's pupils shrank. If this was really the case, then he was in great trouble. Reality proved that Qin Yu's premonition was correct. He was indeed in trouble. When the blood energy that filled the tunnel disappeared, the number of flying mosquitoes was reduced by over half. But the ones that survived had undergone tremendous changes. Their bodies didn't swell, but countless blood-red lines appeared on their earthen yellow outer shell, perhaps because they had absorbed the blood energy. Their dark red eyes were much more spirited than before, and the icy coldness within them was much thicker. Their wings flapped even faster. They left behind after images as they crazily rushed towards Qin Yu. Fear of death they didn't exist. It was as if they didn't know that there was such an emotion as fear in this world. Although he had already determined that the more he killed them, the stronger the remaining flying mosquitoes would become, his intuition told him that he absolutely couldn't let them approach him. The best method was to find a way to get rid of them. He lifted a hand and punched out. Then, without any pause, Qin Yu punched out a second time, a third time. Wild strength erupted like a volcano, sweeping through the entire tunnel and submerging the flying mosquitoes. After finishing this, Qin Yu didn't pause at all. He didn't even look at the damage caused by these 3 punches. He turned and walked away, raising his speed to the limit. The rumbling sounds behind him and the howling of the flying mosquitoes soon vanished from sight. But Qin Yu didn't dare to be careless. He passed through 3 more turning points and entered a tunnel that he didn't even know the direction of. Only then did he relax a little. It seemed that his plan had succeeded. Otherwise, if he were to be entangled here, who knew just how terrifying those flying mosquitoes would become in the end? As he thought of their sharp mouths, Qin Yu's forehead tightened. He shook his head, dispelling the horrifying images in his mind. He couldn't let his imagination run wild. What if it came true later? He arrived at another turning point. Qin Yu stopped. His eyes swept around and he suddenly frowned. The number of forks had decreased. Even though he had walked all the way here, all the passages were the same and he couldn't make any effective distinctions. But Qin Yu continued to calculate. Before this, the number of forks he had passed through had been between 9 and 12, never exceeding this range. But now, Qin Yu had counted 3 times and determined that he wasn't seeing things. There were only 7 passages. Did this mean that he had stumbled into the next level of the maze? The decrease in the number of passages meant that the range of choices had shrunk. Besides that, what else was there? After hesitating for a moment, Qin Yu helplessly sighed. Besides the decrease in number, everything else was the same. Then he could only use the old method and rely on his intuition and luck. The flying mosquitoes experience made Qin Yu realize that his luck was only average. Should he do the opposite? If he chose the worst one, then perhaps he would be fine. In the end, Qin Yu chose the passage that he felt was the safest and the least problematic. There was nothing he could do about it. He looked at the passage several times and felt that it was the worst, but he wasn't in the mood to enter it. But this time, Qin Yu seemed to have chosen the right one. The passage was safe, at least for the time being. As a meticulous and cautious person who didn't miss out on details, Qin Yu certainly wouldn't forget to calculate the length of the passage. If the number of passages decreased and the length didn't change, then he would soon arrive at the next turning point. Sure enough, the turning point appeared at the end of his line of sight. Qin Yu revealed a gratified expression. People had to believe in themselves. He had to remember this in the future. Qin Yu's figure rushed out of the passage and entered the turning point. His previous experience told him that while the inside of the maze was dangerous, it should be safe here. Before Qin Yu could relax a bit, he suddenly tensed up. At this turning point, There was actually something else, a statue. Or, it was more accurate to say that it was a tall and mighty figure. It wore armor and held a large saber in its hand, and its appearance was dignified and dignified. As Chinyu looked at it, the statue blinked and said, "I never thought that someone would arrive here so quickly. Moreover, it doesn't seem like he's injured at all. Boy, your luck is quite good." Chinyu's expression was wooden. He really didn't know what to say. This was clearly a statue in front of him, without the slightest trace of life. Chinyu was certain of this. But now not only was he speaking, but his expression had also become lively, as if he were amazed. What the hell? The statue lightly coughed and moved its body. With cracking sounds, it took several steps back and forth. "As you can see, I am a statue, not a ghost." After saying that, he raised his hand and rubbed his chin. His knuckles rubbed against his chin, making cracking sounds. "However, strictly speaking, I'm no different from a ghost. Living in this place, I'm afraid I'm more miserable than a ghost." Chinyu took a deep breath. "Your Excellency!" Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted. The statue took out a large saber that shined with a cold light. "Don't ask. Even if you ask, I can't tell you. Since we've come here, either I chop you to death or you destroy me. Only one of us can survive. Even though I've been tired of living for a long time, I'm in a position where I have to take care of my own affairs. I can't just sit around and do nothing, right? I've said enough nonsense. Let's get started." After it finished speaking, it slashed out with its saber. Just now, as he watched the statue move, he had heard light cracking sounds that gave off a strange feeling. He originally thought that it wouldn't be too fast, but he discovered that he was wrong. Either the cracking sounds didn't affect it, or this thing was deliberately pretending. Its saber strike could not be described with just the word fast. If it weren't for Chinyu not relaxing his guard and instinctively taking a step back the moment it attacked, perhaps he would have lost half his head by now. Because his reaction was so fast, the tip of his nose almost touched the saber blade. An icy chill suddenly exploded in Chinyu's heart, causing his complexion to change. He had been numbed. Who would have thought that the statue warrior that had always been long-winded and didn't attack would suddenly attack so fiercely? "Hee, your reaction is quite fast, but this is only the first strike." The statue warrior laughed out loud. It didn't pause in the slightest as it pulled back its blade and pushed forward with a flip of its hand. From this push, Chinyu could feel the same feeling he had when he faced the heavenly sword-sex sword, a feeling that was close to the Tao. A dead object could actually slash out such a terrifying saber strike. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have believed it. He drew back once more. The turning point wasn't too large, and not too far behind him was the passage. In just a breath of time, Chinyu would be able to enter. It was the same as when he faced the flying mosquito. If he didn't want to meet it head-on, he could just throw it off. Since this statue warrior had remained here the entire time, that meant it likely had a restricted range of movement. Whether or not this was true, Chinyu didn't have absolute confidence, but he would know once he tried. But before Chinyu could truly enter the passage, the statue warrior with terrifying saber skills suddenly said, "You guessed correctly. I cannot leave this place, but if you don't defeat me..." Its lips curved up. "Then prepare to stay here and accompany me." Schwa. As Chinyu rapidly moved through the passage, he soon understood the meaning of the statue warrior's words. Looking at the end of the passage, at the statue that was holding a saber and smiling at him, Chinyu's complexion paled. Chapter 1185. Your complexion is quite scary. If you don't want to face reality, then you can just turn around and run back. The statue warrior wickedly smiled. It waved the saber in its hands. "In any case, I lack everything here but time." Chinyu turned and walked away. It was impossible for him to believe the statue warrior's words, but reality was always so cruel. It didn't give him any hope at all. Looking at the end of the passage and the statue warrior lazily sitting on the ground, Chinyu's heart sank. It seemed that this statue wasn't lying. He really was trapped in some sort of sealed ring. Unless he broke through the shackles, he wouldn't be able to leave. And the key to the shackles was this statue warrior in front of him. If he killed it, then he could break through it. Hey, what a coincidence, we meet again. The statue warrior slapped the saber in its hands, causing it to ring loudly. Have you calmed down yet? If you still haven't given up, then feel free to toss and turn around a bit more. I can patiently wait for you. At this point, it could be determined that his plan to escape had failed. Chinyu took a deep breath and stepped into the turning point. Without hesitation, he stepped forwards. You're serious? Haha, it's best if you can kill me. These days are just too boring. This was what the statue warrior said. It really did want to die, but it didn't hold back at all. Its saber instantly cut through the air. It wasn't that it didn't want to go easy on Chinyu, but that it couldn't do so. From the day it was born, this was the only will that had been engraved into its body. Thinking about it carefully, the statue warrior was in a pitiful state. Even if it wanted to die, it would have to meet someone stronger than it. Bang! The turning point wasn't very big, and suddenly there was a deafening roar. The deafening roar reverberated in the air. As Chinyu was fighting the statue warrior, the cultivators that followed behind him also fell into a chaotic melee. If Chinyu could see the situation these people were facing right now, he would be surprised to find that his luck was so good. All sorts of messy tricks that he hadn't encountered before were now blooming in the midst of these cultivators, beating them until they cried out for their parents. Those that cried out for their parents were the strong ones. This was because those with poor cultivations didn't even have time to cry out before they lost their lives. Of course people would die. Otherwise, wouldn't it ruin the great reputation of the boundary within the boundary? In the eyes of the crowd, this was normal. After entering the land of chaos, no matter how confident they were in themselves, they were more or less prepared to die here. That being said, some of the killer moves in the maze were too terrifying. Among them, the most terrifying were the 2 red mosquitoes that were the size of an adult's arm. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that these 2 beasts had skin of iron and bones of copper. They were immune to most normal attacks. In addition, the speed at which they flapped their wings was frighteningly fast. Basically, by the time you heard their buzzing sound, your heart would be deflated. Nearly half of the cultivators who died in the maze were killed by these 2 beasts. Their long and sharp mouth parts were enough to make one's face pale. It wasn't until the 2 flying mosquitoes locked onto Skirich, sword cultivator, that he met his match for the first time. The 2 sides fought fiercely. In this crisis, the Skirich sword cultivator slashed out a terrifying sword strike. Its might was even more terrifying than the sword strike he sent at Chinyu before. The flying mosquito that approached was cut in half, dying on the spot. The other flying mosquito was also cut in half. But no one imagined that the true horror had only just arrived. The dead flying mosquito's corpse exploded, turning into a mass of scarlet blood energy that held out and wrapped around the severely wounded flying mosquito. After several breaths of time, when all of the blood energy was absorbed, the only remaining flying mosquito had transformed into a nearly crimson crystal. Soon, the Skirich sword cultivator ran away with a broken arm. Half of his body was withered, and he looked like a fierce ghost. After this battle, the blood crystal mosquitoes became a taboo existence in the maze. Every cultivator that saw them fled. Everyone was panic-stricken and gnashing their teeth. They definitely wouldn't have imagined that the blood crystal mosquitoes that they regarded as a nightmare were, strictly speaking, created by Chinyu. They had joined forces to kill Chinyu and forced him into the middle realm. But now, the bloody slaughter of the blood crystal mosquitoes had occurred. Perhaps this was fate. However, no matter how terrifying the blood crystal mosquitoes were, there were only a small minority of cultivators that encountered them. As time passed, they fumbled their way through the maze. There were always some lucky people that managed to break into the next level. In other words, there were fewer turning points where the passages diverged. Then, they discovered that the difficulty of surviving had suddenly risen to a whole new level. Groups of fearless puppets began to drill out from the passages. They wielded sabers, spears, swords, and halberds, all of them different. But their coordination was perfect. They were like an army that surrounded and beat up the cultivators that rushed in. They could only flee in panic, like stray dogs. But there were also some people with similar luck as Chinyu. It wasn't long before they encountered a talkative statue that wielded an incomparably fierce saber. It was like they were locked in a cage. They could only desperately fight it, otherwise they wouldn't be able to go anywhere. Chinyu had come in earlier than them, and his luck was also better. Even though he hadn't realized this, he still hadn't realized it. But this was a fact. When most of these cultivators were chased around by the puppets, and a small number of lucky ones managed to encounter a saber-wielding statue, Chinyu's slaughter had already come to an end. The statue warrior was indeed fierce. Although it seemed fragile, the truth was that it possessed an extremely potent defensive ability. Chinyu pointed 3 times at the same place and tore open a wound on its chest. Then he punched out, widening the wound. The statue warrior's body broke in half and its bright eyes dimmed. Of course, Chinyu also paid a price for this. There were 2 saber wounds on his body. Although his flesh was taut, traces of blood still seeped out and his face paled. Space laws. The statue warrior threw away the saber in its hand and plopped down on the ground. It carefully straightened its broken body with its hands. I never thought that with your cultivation, you would be able to perceive such a supreme, great Tao. Even if you die, it wouldn't be a loss. After coughing twice with difficulty, the statue warrior lowered its head and looked at itself. It adjusted its sitting posture to look even taller and mightier. Only then did it sigh in satisfaction. After that, its eyes flickered for a moment, then flickered again, and then completely extinguished. Hum! A tremor erupted from an inflection point. The surrounding scenery immediately changed. The 7 forks merged into one, forming a single channel. Chinyu thought for a moment and then cupped his hands together towards the statue warrior. 3 fingers struck the same spot. Although Chinyu had used the blue point finger that contained the space laws, with the statue warrior's strength, it wasn't necessarily impossible for it to dodge. After being struck 3 times in a row, perhaps in terms of strength erupting, it hadn't been lenient at all. It had left Chinyu with 2 terrifying saber wounds that were deep enough to break bones, causing his face to pale white. But there was still a bit of deliberate intent behind this. It really did want to die. The old turtle's shadow shook. Of course, this wasn't his name, but that didn't matter. A name was only a symbol. Then, there was the statue warrior that had fallen, completely silent in front of him. Strictly speaking, in Chinyu's not-too-short life, he had only encountered 2 existences that wished for death to arrive. Perhaps in their eyes, death was the only release. Kacha! Kacha! Cracks began to appear at the inflection point, constantly spreading outwards. Chinyu sighed. It really was impossible to stay here and recuperate. As the master of the maze, it was impossible for him to make such a low-level mistake. Chinyu turned and flew into the channel. Although he didn't know where it connected to, since it was the only way out, unless he wanted to stay here forever, he could only explore it himself. But this time, he discovered that his caution was meaningless. This was because the channel was extremely calm. After reaching the end, a grand courtyard appeared in front of him. Although it was peaceful and tranquil, standing in front of this courtyard, Chinyu revealed a dignified expression. Could this be the place where the soul bodies of the mystic realm resided? Had he already arrived at the core area of the maze? The wind blew and rustled the leaves, causing them to rustle against each other. Apart from that, there was only silence. This was true silence. You could clearly hear his own footsteps and the beating of his heart. Chapter 1186. There were stone lions in front of the courtyard, vivid and lifelike as if they were alive. Their eyes were wide open as they stared the door, full of dignity and majesty. Chinyu glanced at them and couldn't help but take another look. He walked over and touched them, his complexion changing. A cultivator resonated with the world. After their magic power was used up, they needed to absorb heaven and earth's spiritual energy to recover. As one's boundary rose, the magic power within one's body became increasingly robust. Although the absorption speed increased, it still required a great deal of time to recover. If it was a daily cultivation, it wouldn't matter if it was a bit slow. But what if it was a battle? The speed at which one's magic power was restored could determine life or death. Thus, there were options outside of conventional methods to restore one's magic power. For instance, there were recovery pills and spirit stones. In fact, with Qin Yu's current boundary, ordinary spirit stones were meaningless to him. The amount of spiritual energy contained within them was nothing more than a drop in the bucket compared to what he needed to restore his magic power. But this was only referring to ordinary quality. For instance, these 2 stone lions in front of him were made from a special material that Qin Yu had never come into contact with before. They were also spirit stones. If they had to be divided into grades, they could be called peerless grade. The moment he touched them just now, Qin Yu could clearly feel the pure and astonishing amount of heaven and earth's spiritual energy contained within. According to Qin Yu's calculations, just a palm-sized piece would be enough for him to restore all of his magic power. As for these 2 stone lions in front of him, he would likely be able to cut them into several hundred pieces. This was a massive amount of wealth, not to mention anything else. But with these 2 stone lions in hand, it would be extraordinarily difficult to exhaust Qin Yu's strength when he fought with his life on the line. As long as he could hold on, he could even exhaust his opponent to death. Good things, of course, they were good things, but such good things were placed right in front of him. Was this normal? Moreover, Qin Yu could sense no shackles or traps. These 2 stone lions, no, they should be called peerless grade spirit stone lions. They seemed as if he could take them away as long as he stretched out his hand. This was like a meat pie falling from the heavens. Qin Yu glanced at the tightly shut door and took a deep breath to suppress his desires. This was a realm within a realm in the depths of the land of chaos. There was a mysterious and powerful soul hidden here. Who knew if there would be any problems? The 2 lions were placed here. He wasn't in a hurry to make a move. At the very least, he needed to investigate the condition of this courtyard. With this thought in mind, he walked to the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The courtyard door opened silently without any obstruction. A magnificent front courtyard appeared in his sight. But soon, Qin Yu wasn't in the mood to pay attention to the scenery, because he saw many, many treasures. At the entrance, just a few dozen feet away from him, there was an orchid in full bloom. A faint fragrance wafted out, stimulating his sense of smell. He subconsciously took a deep breath. He felt his spirits rise and his soul begin to stir. Then, an intense desire spread out from him. Although he didn't know what species this orchid was, there was no doubt that it was a powerful soul treasure. And this was just an extremely ordinary example within his field of vision. This was because there were many, many things similar to orchids. A blade of grass in the flower bed, a vine that climbed up the wall in the corner of the courtyard, and an unknown yellow flower that swayed gently in the wind on the rockery all released an alluring aura. Qin Yu never imagined that as he focused his mind and pushed open the door, he would actually open a treasure trove. And right now he was at the entrance of the treasure trove. The door was already open. As long as he wanted to, all of this would be his. Cultivators defied the heavens and changed their fate. They pursued to constantly become stronger, to contend with fate, and to walk out a wonderful life that belonged solely to them. And in the end, the degree of brilliance and the length of one's life was determined by one's cultivation. Thus, the pursuit of greater strength was an uncontrollable instinct of all cultivators. Now, facing the treasures in this courtyard, Qin Yu could clearly feel the powerful impact of this instinct. Even with Qin Yu's shrewdness, he still couldn't help but feel his throat go dry. A blazing light instinctively appeared in the depths of his eyes. There were no spells or traps. They were placed in front of him. He only needed to stretch out his hand and he could reach them. Qin, you could confirm that this wasn't an illusion. Everything he experienced was real. But why? Could it be that what he thought was true? Was this the lair of a powerful soul body within the boundary? Thus the reason there were these treasures? Even so, there shouldn't be no defenses. Or could it be that this soul body never imagined that someone would be able to break into this place? Qin Yu took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Something was wrong. He thought of the saber-wielding warrior that had died and turned into a statue. Its existence was clearly a test. As long as one passed through it, a channel would be opened and they would arrive here. In other words, everything was arranged by the master of the labyrinth. Could this courtyard be a reward for those who passed? Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows, bitterly smiling inwardly. This wasn't some kind of test where there would be a prize if he passed. Moreover, even if there was a reward, it was impossible for it to be generous to such a degree. It had to be known that what Qin Yu saw was only the stone lions outside the door and the front courtyard in front of him. The value of the treasures he saw left his heart trembling, nearly making it hard for him to control himself. But compared to the entire courtyard, it wasn't worth mentioning at all. It might not even occupy 1% of the entire courtyard. If the interior of this courtyard was the same as what he saw in front of him, just thinking about it caused Qin Yu's breathing to become rough. No, there was a problem. There had to be a problem here. Qin Yu could feel his heart pounding in his chest. A sense of unease began to grow in his heart. There was no reason, it was just a powerful intuition. In fact, Qin Yu wasn't the only one with this intuition. The old turtle suddenly said, "Master, it's best if you don't touch anything in this courtyard." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. Why? The old turtle hesitated for a moment. "I don't know, but I feel like something is wrong." He paused for a moment. "Perhaps you can try to take one of them. I will carefully sense it." Qin Yu thought for a moment. He walked over to the orchid. As he got closer, the fragrance it emitted became even richer. He subconsciously licked his lips. He reached out and grabbed the orchid, pulling it out with a bit of force. "Stop!" the old turtle screamed. Qin Yu instantly let go and stepped back. His body tensed up. He was ready to attack at any moment. Everything was calm. The orchid gently swayed in front of him, the wind carrying its fragrance. Qin Yu said in a low voice, "What is it?" "The smell of a contract." The old turtle's voice tightened. "Just now, when Master grabbed it, I felt the power of a contract. As long as you grab the orchid, it will belong to you. Then a contract will be opened. I don't know what the content of the contract is, but it's best if you don't try it." Qin Yu keenly grasped the crux of the matter. "What are you afraid of?" Although the old turtle feared death as the shadow of the abyss, he was destined to possess all sorts of mystical and formidable abilities. Ordinary methods were useless against him. If one didn't have a bit of true ability, then even if they stretched out their head for you to chop it off, you still wouldn't be able to harm the old turtle in the least. This sort of old turtle feared death. But first you had to have the capital to make him afraid. Now, Qin Yu could feel the fear in the emotions of the old turtle. "I don't dare to hide anything from Master. That smell of a contract just now made me feel a formidable threat. This is why I warned you not to try it. Do not touch anything in this courtyard. For them to appear here, there must be some unspeakable secret." Qin Yu's complexion became increasingly dignified. He couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. He thought back to the 2 top spirit stone lions outside the door. Luckily, he had been cautious enough not to touch them. Otherwise, things would have been far more troublesome. All right. As he thought, he didn't even need to think about the rewards for clearing the trial. Even if they did exist, there was definitely some poisonous bait hidden somewhere. Since he had determined that this courtyard in front of him wasn't some good place, then no matter how many treasures there were, it was meaningless. Qin Yu decided to leave this place. He tightened his grip on the unconscious Yunshur and began to search for a way out. The first thing he did was to withdraw from the door, but the passage he had come from had already disappeared. The courtyard was surrounded by a bamboo forest. There was fog in the forest, and the deeper one went, the thicker the fog became until it covered everything. It was like a deep night, so dark that one couldn't even see their fingers. His figure flashed, and Qin Yu rushed into the bamboo forest. The moment he stepped into the fog, his complexion changed. This fog was poisonous, and the most terrifying thing was that it was drawn in by the aura of life. In other words, as long as a living being entered, it would be invaded by the poison. If it were only Qin Yu, then the invasion of the poison wouldn't be too serious a matter for him. But there was still the unconscious Yun sure behind him. She was already in a bad situation. If the poison invaded her body, the consequences could be imagined. Unless he didn't care about her life or death, he wouldn't be able to enter the fog and search for a way out. Shua. Qin Yu withdrew from the fog. He turned and put down Yunshur. Her complexion had already turned pale. This was a sign of the invasion of the poison. After expending a great deal of effort, he finally dispelled the poison. Then he carried Yunshur on his back and turned to look at the wide open courtyard entrance. He could only go in and think of a way out. After spending an entire day, Qin Yu walked around the entire courtyard. As he expected, there were treasures everywhere. He could casually grab them with his eyes closed. But no matter how many treasures there were, with the warning of the old turtle, Qin Yu wouldn't touch them at all. But when good things were near his mouth and the taste was tempting, he could only forcefully endure it. That sort of feeling wasn't pleasant at all. The only thing that comforted Qin Yu was that this courtyard was very safe. There really wasn't any danger. At the very least, he didn't encounter any trouble after making his way around. But Qin Yu didn't discover any way out. The entire courtyard only had a single entrance, the main entrance. Let alone side doors or back doors, there wasn't even a dog hole. He returned to the entrance. Looking at the courtyard entrance, Qin Yu revealed a thoughtful expression. This massive courtyard was filled with countless treasures. It was impossible that it was prepared for him alone. On that day in front of the mountain, those cultivators that wanted to kill him should have already entered the maze. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. Perhaps the only thing he could do now was wait. Wait for other cultivators to come here. With the warning of the old turtle, he discovered that these treasures contained contract fluctuations. Thus, he was able to barely resist the greed that rose from the depths of his heart. The cultivators that came later might not be able to do so. As long as they moved, there would inevitably be changes to the things in this courtyard. Perhaps at that time, he would be able to find a way to leave this place. Closing the doors, Qin Yu used half a day to erase all traces he left behind after entering the courtyard. Then he pushed open a wooden shed in the backyard. After closing the door, he brought Yunshur to hide behind a pile of firewood. Qin Yu had come here before and carefully examined it. Compared to other places, this place was considered very barren. Besides the pile of wood in the courtyard, there were also some scattered flowers and plants. Their value wasn't even worth a single piece of land. Even if someone came here, they wouldn't be interested in this wooden shed. Qin Yu put down Yunshur and carefully prepared himself. With a point of his finger, faint fluctuations spread out and the two's auras vanished from sight. He sat down cross-legged and looked outside. He muttered, "I hope someone comes soon." Chapter 1187. The cultivators behind him were slower than Qin Yu expected. After waiting for 2 days, no one arrived. However, it wasn't as if he didn't have any harvests in these 2 days. Staring at a blue brick on the ground, Qin Yu frowned, a bit of surprise in his eyes. He never thought that hiding in such a place would result in an unexpected harvest. Of course, Qin Yu didn't know what it was exactly, but there was definitely something underneath this blue brick, because it was actually empty. If it weren't for Qin Yu choosing this firewood room, hiding in this pile of firewood, and then stepping on this brick. That's right. It would have been such a coincidence. Whether it was looking at it with the naked eye or sensing it with divine sense, there were no flaws. But the sound of his feet stepping on it was different. In such a strange courtyard, countless treasures were contaminated with the smell of a contract that even the old turtle dreaded. Qin Yu was certainly aware that he couldn't touch anything, but he was really curious as to what was hidden underneath this brick. He had the old turtle carefully inspect it. There was no problem with the brick itself. Qin Yu hesitated again and clenched his teeth. He easily picked up the brick. It was heavier than he imagined. He carefully shook it a few times, and there was a crashing sound. It was inside the brick. "Master, be careful. You must be careful." The old turtle was nervous. He had already cursed Qin Yu several hundred times in his heart. How old was he? Why was he still so curious? Didn't he know that this thing could easily kill someone? He was speechless. Couldn't he just live a good life? Qin Yu took a deep breath. He exerted a bit of force with his fingers. With a light cracking sound, the brick broke into several pieces. A ball fell out. It looked like a lump of iron that had been buried underground for countless years. The surface was heavily rusted, a dark red mixed with a deep yellow rust color. "Have you checked it?" "Master, I've checked it 8 times. There really isn't the smell of a contract on it." The good news was that this thing was different from the other treasures in the courtyard. It wasn't contaminated with that unknown and terrifying contract. Qin Yu took it in his hand. His first thought was that this thing didn't seem heavy. No wonder the brick was so heavy. Then he thought it was ordinary. There was no reaction at all. It was like a real rusted lump of iron. But that didn't make sense. Who would be so bored as to treat a lump of iron as a treasure and hide it in the floor tiles of the woodshed? No matter which story it was in, this was the rhythm of the big baby's appearance. It couldn't be that simple. Qin Yu tried to pour magic power into it, but it was like a clay ox sinking into the sea. There wasn't even the slightest bit of movement. This result caused Qin Yu's eyes to brighten. There really was a problem. If it was really just an ordinary lump of iron, it would have been smashed into pieces by his magic power. The fact that it could absorb magic power meant that there was a universe within it. Furthermore, the way it ate without revealing anything was definitely not ordinary. Qin Yu held it in his hand and constantly poured magic power into it. At the start, he was a bit worried that it wouldn't be able to withstand it, so he deliberately controlled the speed. However, as time passed and it absorbed an unknown amount of magic power, the metal lump was still the same metal lump. There was no change at all. What else was there to say? He stretched out his arms and poured his magic power into it as if his life depended on it. He didn't believe that it was a bottomless pit. 2 hours passed. 4 hours passed. 6 hours, there was still a bit left. Qin Yu opened his eyes. His complexion was pale and beads of sweat covered his forehead. He still had magic power in his body, but less than half of it remained. In this courtyard, he didn't dare to allow himself to fall into a weakened state. Looking at the iron lump that was still maintaining its true self, Qin Yu felt a headache coming on. With his current cultivation, the thickness of his magic power far surpassed that of an ordinary divine stepmaster. Even though he had thrown in half of it, there wasn't even a ripple. However, the more this happened, the more it proved that this lump of iron wasn't ordinary. The plot didn't lie. This was the big baby that had made its grand entrance. Restore magic power. At this time, Qin Yu couldn't help but think back to the 2 top-grade spirit stone lions outside the entrance to the courtyard. If they were here, he wouldn't need to go through so much trouble. He could just hug them and absorb them for a while and restore his magic power. With great difficulty, his magic power was restored. Then, he picked up the iron lump and continued. But even when Qin Yu's magic power fell below half, there still wasn't any change. Then he began to restore his magic power once more. He missed the lion heads. After going back and forth 7 or 8 times, Qin Yu's entire body froze. He couldn't help but wonder whether or not he was doing something useless. The amount of magic power he was pouring out was enough to blow up an original god realm master several times. But there was still no reaction at all. He thought about giving up, but he tossed that thought aside. The tenacity in Qin Yu's bones had been stimulated by the iron lump. He didn't believe that, as a true man who had ventured into the dark abyss, he wouldn't be able to deal with a little thing like this. As Qin Yu gathered his strength and began his battle with the iron lump in the bamboo forest outside the courtyard, a thick fog violently tumbled. A passage condensed in the blink of an eye, leading to the only entrance. Soon, a cultivator flew out. His appearance was miserable. Half of his body was withered, as if all his flesh and blood had been sucked out. One of his arms had also disappeared. The moment he flew out of the passage, he spat out several mouthfuls of blood. But his back remained straight, and a terrifying sword intent surged around him. Heavenly sword sex, high firmament. One arm grasped a sword. His sharp eyes fell on the courtyard in front of him. He didn't relax his guard at all, even if this place didn't seem dangerous. Soon, just like Qin Yu, Ling Zhao's eyes fell on 2 stone lions outside the courtyard. After a moment of thought, he walked over and placed a hand on them. Even with the cold and indifferent nature of a sky-piercer sword cultivator, his complexion changed. His eyes widened as he stared at the stone lions, shock in his eyes. Original God Step Spirit Stone. Strictly speaking, Qin Yu didn't recognize this type of spirit stone and had casually given it the title of a top-grade spirit stone. That was because he was ignorant and inexperienced. In fact, the cultivation world already had a set of standards for spirit stones that surpassed the limits of quality and transformed to another level. They could be used by cultivators at the divine realm and above. The rules were simple. According to the purity and amount of spiritual strength contained in a spirit stone, if it could satisfy the needs of a divine realm cultivator, then it would be at the original God step. As for higher levels, no one had ever seen them. Or, even if they did exist, they were in the hands of the highest existences. An original God step spirit stone was the highest level that could be found in this world. Of course, its value wasn't low. Looking at all the heavens, an original God cultivator was an absolute powerhouse. They were extremely wealthy, so they wouldn't be stingy when it came to life-saving items. Even with the temperament of a sky-piercer sword cultivator, when he confirmed that the 2 giant lions in front of him were truly made of original God step spirit stones, his eyes couldn't help but turn red. It wasn't that he was a good-for-nothing. If it were any other place, even if he saw so many original God step spirit stones, he wouldn't be so useless. But now, Ling Zhao's strength was nearly exhausted, and he had sustained severe wounds. He could only wait for his death. Coincidentally, he had run into these 2 guardian lions made of original God step spirit stones. What else could he say? There was no need to say anything. Since he had hugged them, he would absorb them. It wasn't that Ling Zhao wasn't as cautious as Qin Yu, and it wasn't that he didn't know how to investigate before making a decision. It was that he didn't have the time. If he waited any longer, he didn't know how long he could last. In front of life and death, nothing mattered. Not to mention the fact that he didn't know the situation. Even if he knew it was a poisonous steamed bun, he would eat it first to save his life and then think of another solution. The effect of an original God step spirit stone was really amazing. After Ling Zhao hugged and sucked for a while, his pale face looked much better. Even half of his shriveled body had recovered a little. If this continued, Ling Zhao would recover in at most 1 day. It wasn't impossible for him to regrow his broken limbs. However, just as he was sighing inwardly, thinking that after so many misfortunes he could finally welcome the light, the fog in the bamboo forest rolled again. Another passage had formed. Ling Zhao suddenly opened his eyes. Cold light surged in his eyes, and countless sword shadows were moving. After several breaths, a cultivator flew out with the sound of breaking air. In a flash, this person was like facing a great enemy. Stimulated by the sword intent, his tyrannical aura broke out of his body. When their eyes met, Ling Xiao frowned. He didn't recognize this person. He didn't have much of an impression of him before. However, the other's strength wasn't weak. Even in a weakened state, a sword cultivator's keen senses were still there. This was definitely a strong enemy. However, thinking about the news he had heard before the Endless Sea opened, it was understandable that such a hidden expert would appear. Original God Step Spirit Stone. This cultivator's voice was low and hoarse. His eyes fell on Ling Xiao, revealing a trace of coldness. He could see that Ling Xiao was seriously injured. Right now, he was absolutely in his weakest state. He was a little hesitant, but soon he sighed inwardly. He was too late. If he had come an hour earlier, or even a quarter of an hour, his chances of killing Ling Xiao would have been much higher. As for now, although there was a high chance that he could kill Ling Xiao, there would definitely be risks. After all, with the Heavenly Sword sex methods, they definitely didn't lack secret techniques to die together with the enemy. It wasn't easy to get out of the maze alive and arrive in front of this mysterious courtyard. It wasn't worth risking his life to fight someone casually. Of course, another important reason was that not far from here, there was another lion made of original God Step Spirit Stone. This made him feel much more at ease. At the very least, it could be said that everyone had split the rewards here equally. It wasn't shameful to share the gains with Ling Xiao of the Heavenly Sword sect. His figure moved, coming to the side of the lion. His divine sense swept around. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, the mysterious cultivator copied Ling Xiao and threw himself over to protect the lion. He was also injured, but his injuries were much lighter than Ling Xiao's. However, in such a dangerous place, it was best to recover to peak condition. The mysterious cultivator also made a mistake. His carelessness was due to Ling Xiao's previous example. According to his thinking, if Ling Xiao hadn't checked carefully, would he have dared to hug the stone lion and suck it? Well, even if his injuries weren't light and he didn't have time to do so, but after absorbing for so long, he was obviously fine, then what was there to worry about? Ling Xiao closed his eyes, his tense heart relaxing a little. However, he still didn't dare to be careless. He had seen too many unexpected failures. Right now, the most important thing was to recover from his injuries as soon as possible. As the old saying went, don't say anything, just hug it and suck it with all your might. While Ling Xiao and the mysterious cultivator were racing against time to absorb the spiritual energy, they didn't know that the power of the two contracts had quietly come into effect. One end of the contract was with the two of them, while the other end crossed the endless space, continuously going down and down, submerging into an unknown place. Chapter 1188. Someone had broken into this place. In the wooden hut, Qin Yu looked up towards the entrance. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. There were two people. One of them had a strange aura, but the other was quite familiar. Sky Split, Sword Sex Ling Xiao. Thinking about it, this made sense. Although the labyrinth within the boundary was something that tested one's luck, in a situation where everyone's luck was about the same, strength was the key. With Qin Yu as an example, if he was weak, then let alone coming here, he would have already been cut down by the statue warrior's saber. Although he wasn't sure how the other cultivators had come here, the difference in difficulty shouldn't be too great. Although he couldn't see what was happening outside the courtyard, he could roughly guess from the aura he sensed that Ling Xiao should be the first cultivator to arrive after him. However, before he entered the courtyard, a second cultivator arrived. The two sides confronted each other for a short period of time before everything calmed down. But for things to calm down, there was a process. It didn't take too long, only several breaths of time. Even so, many things were exposed. Even with the strength of the Sky Split, Sword Sex, Sword Cultivator, this strange cultivator actually hesitated for a moment before finally choosing to give up. Then there was only one explanation. Ling Xiao had suffered heavy injuries, and this strange cultivator saw a chance to take advantage of him. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. After the heavily wounded Ling Xiao arrived, he didn't enter the range of the courtyard. Rather, he remained outside, those two top-grade spirit stone lions. This must be it. He must be borrowing the strength of the spirit stones to recover from his injuries. In other words, the terrifying contract that the old turtle had sensed had most likely been triggered. And this was what Qin was looking forward to seeing. Speaking of this, there was a bit of a sinister and cruel element to it. But the truth was that they weren't familiar with each other and had nearly risked their lives towards someone who wanted to kill him. Qin didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy. If the sky-split sword cultivator could use his own tragic fate to find an exit for him to leave, then Qin would be very happy. Since there was one, and then there was a second, it wouldn't be too long before more cultivators arrived. Qin thought for a moment. Then he turned his attention back to the lump of iron in his hand. He could only wait and see what was happening outside. This would take time, and what he needed to do during this period of time was to figure out just what this lump of iron in his hand was. Now, he didn't need intuition to tell him anything. He was 100% sure that this thing was extraordinary. Nonsense, a normal piece of iron. How could it swallow so much magic power? In the end, Ling Xiao's thoughts of quickly recovering from his injuries came to nothing. It wasn't that the unfamiliar cultivator who was happily sucking on another lion wanted to take action again, but rather that the thick mist in the bamboo forest surged once more. Shwa! Shwa! The two of them opened their eyes at the same time. They acted simultaneously, retrieving the original God-grade spirit stone lion in their arms. The passageways began to condense, and there were actually two. After several breaths of time, two figures flew out from the tunnel at nearly the same time. Ling Xiao, here you are. Wan Jing's eyes brightened, and then he was surprised. He had seen the miserable state of the Tongtian sword cultivators with his own eyes not long ago. Such a serious injury had actually healed quite a bit in such a short period of time. It seemed that he must have gained something. After scanning the surroundings, Wan Jing's gaze fell on the spot where the guardian lion had been. The color of the ground was clearly different from that of the surroundings. With a single glance, it was clear that something had been taken away. And on the other side of the door, there was another similar mark in a symmetrical position. The cultivator that flew out from the other tunnel slowly said, "It seems that both of you have harvested something." Ling Xiao looked at him. He raised his sword with one arm. "If you want it, then come and take it." This person's complexion changed. He sneered, "Ling Xiao, how much strength do you have left? If Wan Jing is willing to join forces with me, then you will die without a doubt." The air suddenly froze. Ling Xiao had a calm expression. "Then let's begin." Wan Jing laughed. "I am friends with Ling Xiao, and Xiangzhang Academy and the Heavenly Sword Sect have been friends for generations. How could I possibly harm Ling Xiao?" He looked at the cultivator beside him with ill intent in his eyes. "Su Zhu, if you try to sow discord between me and Ling Xiao again, then don't blame me for being impolite." In terms of absolute strength, Sky Roaming Temple couldn't compare with Xiangzhang Academy or the Heavenly Sword Sect. But the Su family was an exception. 1,000 years ago, an old ancestor of the Su family who had been in death seclusion had broken through the shackles of his cultivation and reached the sea-crossing realm in a single go. He was revered as a half-saint. Even the various holy lands had to give this newly ascended half-saint enough respect. As a direct descendant, Su Zhu certainly had the confidence to not fear the Heavenly Sword Sect. As long as the half-saint old ancestor was alive, no one would dare target the Su family. But Xiangzhang Academy and the Heavenly Sword Sect each had the shadow of a saint behind them, so they were roughly equal. With a cold sneer, he cursed Wan Jing inwardly for being useless. No wonder he had always been suppressed in cultivation by the Heavenly Sword Sect all these years. He actually didn't know how to take advantage of such a good opportunity. If he was alone, the risk of dealing with Ling Xiao was far too high. Moreover, it was highly likely that others would take advantage of him. So he couldn't take the risk. There were two things. The one in Ling Xiao's hand was temporarily set aside. If he was interested, then he could only think of another way. It wasn't just Su Zhu who thought this. Ruan Jing also had some ideas. They were far too curious as to just what these two people had obtained. Ling Xiao had suffered heavy injuries. This was something that almost everyone knew. But now he had the strength to protect himself. This naturally left everyone envious. Of course, besides curiosity and envy, there was also a bit of unwillingness and unwillingness. They had arrived just a moment too late, and the treasure had been taken away. The unfamiliar cultivator noticed this. He frowned, and a gloomy expression appeared on his face. "Do you two want to steal it from my hands?" He sneered and took a step forwards. A powerful aura erupted like a volcano recklessly released. His robes fluttered in the wind, and endless thunder appeared in the depths of his eyes. Rumble, rumble. In the void, thunderclaps rang out one after another. Ruan Jing's complexion changed. "Are you from the Thunder Dominion?" Yes. The unfamiliar cultivator remained expressionless. This was a bit awkward. In terms of fame, the Thunder Dominion certainly couldn't compare to Xiangzhan Academy or the Heavenly Sword Sect. It was even worse than Skytor Temple. But as long as one knew of the existence of the Thunder Dominion, they wouldn't underestimate it in the slightest. The reason was simple. The master of the Thunder Dominion was a half-saint powerhouse that had lived for an extremely long time. His strength was unfathomably deep. In the past, a saint had broken into the Thunder Dominion and tried to subdue the master of the Thunder Dominion. After a great battle, the saint had left in a rage, but afterwards, the Thunder Dominion was still the Thunder Dominion. After this battle, the master of the Thunder Dominion was recognized as one of the strongest powerhouses beneath the ruler of the universe. He was said to be able to fight a true saint. Ruan Jing smiled and cupped his hands together. "I've long heard that cultivators of the Thunder Dominion cultivate thunder arts and can control the power of thunder. Now that I see you today, you truly live up to your reputation." To him, changing his expression didn't pose any pressure at all, let alone the fact that they hadn't torn apart any pretense of cordiality. Even if they were already badly battered, as long as no one died, he could still turn the situation around. Losing face was inevitable, but this was something that couldn't be eaten or drunk. To offend a Thunder Dominion cultivator for something like that was clearly a stupid choice. Moreover, this Thunder Dominion cultivator was extremely strong. Cough, cough. In the end, everything depended on strength. If this person in front of him was a weak chicken, then so what if he came from the Thunder Dominion? If he died in the land of Chaos Mystic Realm, then that was because he was weak and had bad luck. He couldn't blame anyone else. Su Zhu lightly coughed. He didn't look at the Thunder Dominion cultivator. Instead, he coldly sneered. "What's the situation with this residence?" Ling Xiao was expressionless. It was clear he wouldn't answer. If no one answered, then the situation would become awkward. Although it wasn't a big deal to be embarrassed, and it was also good to see Su Zhu lose face. In this situation where they couldn't fight, there was no point in playing these petty tricks. The Thunder Dominion cultivator said, "We only arrived a moment earlier than you two, so we haven't had the time to enter and investigate." She glanced at Ling Xiao. Seeing that he didn't respond, Ruan Jing smiled and said, "If that's the case, then the four of us can join forces to investigate this residence. This way we can look out for each other." The Thunder Dominion cultivator smiled insincerely. That's right. Everyone knew how to talk nonsense. If they really encountered danger, then they would fly off on their own, competing to see who could flap their wings faster. You could say you'd help, but if you didn't play dirty and trip them up, you'd be lucky if you kicked them back to block a knife. Of course, this was the case, but since they hadn't completely fallen out with each other, they still had to care about their face on the surface. "Let's go." Ling Xiao expressionlessly walked towards the door. Su Zhu hurriedly followed. Intentionally or unintentionally, he walked very close to Ling Xiao. Ling Xiao glanced at him, coldness flashing in his eyes. Then he calmed down. Wan Jing sneered inwardly. The Su family had risen too quickly, and their eyesight was too shallow. Right now, Ling Xiao looked disheveled and was in the worst condition out of the group. But just because of this, he wanted to treat him as a target that could take a knife for him. Being a target for a knife was a little too naive. The Heavenly Sword sect's methods were always decisive. Either kill your opponent or be killed by others. Be a target for someone else? That didn't exist. Humph, just wait and see. If there were any tricks, the first to cry would be Su Zhu. Wan Jing's thoughts raced. Then he smiled and turned. Brother Zhou, please. The Thunder Dominion cultivator's face twitched. He thought that his master was right. The scholars of Xiangzhang Academy had the thickest skin of all. Of course, in direct proportion to how thick their skin was how black-hearted they were, he had to be twice as careful around this boy, lest he be schemed against. Brother Wan, please. The two looked at each other and smiled. There was a sense of closeness between them as they smiled at each other. Standing in front and looking at the tightly shut door, the four people each had a thoughtful look in their eyes. Then they reached out a hand and pushed forward. Just like Qin Yu's previous experience, nothing happened at all. The door quietly opened, revealing a courtyard filled with treasures. Who? A gust of wind blew, ruffling the robes of the four people. The air suddenly fell into a strange silence. In all fairness, the four people standing outside all had extraordinary backgrounds. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that their statuses were noble and respected. It was necessary to be experienced and knowledgeable. But even with these two essentials, they still couldn't help but fall into a daze. Treasures, could they also exist in such a manner? The impact that Qin Yu had withstood was like a tsunami in the hearts of the four cultivators, rumbling endlessly. The yellow flower on the rockery was a soul birth flower, right? There was a vine in the corner with small leaves and an unremarkable green color. But if they weren't wrong, this thing was called a soul-reaping flower. It shared the same name as the soul-reaping flower of the Sly Life clan. Its effect was to suppress soul injuries. No matter how serious the situation was, as long as one ate a section of it, they could ensure that their soul didn't scatter. This was simply a divine, life-saving treasure. There were also the flower beds on both sides of the road. As far as the eye could see, even the smell of grass was enchanting. Treasures, they were all treasures. Su Zhu's eyes turned red and his breathing became heavy. But right now, the one with the most intense change in mood was the Thunder Dominion cultivator surnamed Zhou. After a moment of shock, he bitterly smiled. If he knew that this courtyard would be like this, he wouldn't have hesitated at all. He would have taken the risk to kill off the Skyrend sword cultivator. At that time, all these treasures would have already become his. But there was no medicine for regret in this world. It was already too late to think about these things. Whoosh! There was the cry of a sword. The Skyrend sword cultivator held away. He didn't care about the treasures in the courtyard and soon vanished into the depths of the courtyard. Wan Jing's fingers trembled. He restrained his impulse to attack. He smiled and said, Ling Xiao has left. Let's discuss how to distribute these things. The Thunder Dominion cultivator said, since you and I were able to come here, that means there will be others who will also arrive here. There is no time to delay. You and I will each choose a direction. What we obtain will depend on our luck. No one had any objections. They weren't idiots. It was impossible for them to leave a pile of treasures untouched and decide who was better and who was better first so that other cultivators could take advantage of them. There was no need to say anything else. Let's begin. Wan Jing stared at a blade of grass in front of him, a look of hesitation in his eyes. He also felt that this courtyard was filled with treasures was a bit inappropriate. But before he could think any further, he heard movement. The Thunder Dominion cultivator had begun to move. He was extremely fast. He didn't care that his harvesting methods were crude and would damage the treasures themselves. All he wanted was to take away as many things as possible in the shortest time possible. Wan Jing's heart filled with urgency. Someone would soon arrive. If these treasures were placed here and he didn't take them away, they would be taken by other cultivators. Wan Jing focused his senses once more, but still couldn't sense anything wrong. He took a deep breath and clenched his teeth. Caution was a virtue. In these past years, it had indeed helped him avoid many dangers. But today he didn't discover any problems. Perhaps the scene in front of him was too impactful, causing him to become a bit sensitive. Of course, the Thunder Dominion cultivator had already begun to wantonly collect treasures and was still safe and sound. This caused Wan Jing to feel a little more at ease. He reached out and grasped the grass. A sweet smell entered his nose and dispelled the last bit of hesitation in his eyes. He exerted a bit of strength, and the entire grass was uprooted. A feeling of joy subconsciously gushed out from the depths of his heart. Wan Jing smiled. Now this treasure was his. Chapter 1189. My name is Su Zhu, and my nickname is the Little Reincarnated Expert. I don't refute this because this is the truth. Because the old ancestor is quite amazing and has become a half-step saint, the Su family has risen, and I have also benefited from it. Second-generation cultivator. That's what outsiders call me. But it's quite appropriate. Of course, it doesn't really matter whether it's appropriate or not. What I want to say is that as a reincarnated expert, I have seen all sorts of grand scenes since I was young. For example, for cultivation treasures, even if ordinary cultivators fought to the death and begged everywhere, they still might not be able to obtain a few. But I am different. From the moment I stepped onto the path of cultivation, I had whatever I wanted. It might be a bit exaggerated to use one and throw one away. But I have enough, there's nothing I can do about it. My strength doesn't allow me to be low-key. But today, I, Su Zhu, feel that my previous understanding was too narrow. It turns out that there is such a fierce place in this world where treasures aren't counted by number, but by piles and pieces. It's fine if the quality is average, but the key is that they are all good things. How good are they? With my background, I don't even have time to wipe my saliva. Mine, it's all mine. Whoever dares to compete with me, I will kill them. The people who competed had arrived. As the Thunder Dominion cultivator had said, if they could come here, so could others. Previously, Wan Jing and Su Zhu didn't know what the Thunder Dominion cultivator and High Sky Dominion cultivator had obtained. Their eyes were filled with jealousy, and they were unwilling to give up, so they almost attacked them. Thinking about it, if the cultivators who came later saw the three people wantonly collecting treasures in the front yard, what would their reaction be? They would likely have the heart to skin them alive. With the arrival of the other cultivators, there was no room for discussion, and a chaotic battle immediately erupted. At the start, Su Zhu, Wan Jing, and the Thunder Dominion cultivator tried to join forces to kill the newcomers, but they soon gave up on this idea. This was because 7 passages in the fog had opened in a short period of time, and a large number of cultivators had begun to break into the house. Seeing his treasures being taken away by others, Su Zhu's eyes turned red. But he wasn't stupid enough to recklessly fight with his life on the line. When Wan Jing was the first to turn around and leave, no longer trying to stop them, Su Zhu gritted his teeth and quickly left. But in next to no time, the vexation, hatred, and helplessness in his heart completely vanished. Su Zhu, who felt like he had been refreshed, had to admit that he was really a frog in a well. They were all treasures, all treasures. It wasn't just limited to the front yard. Throughout the entire mansion, he couldn't see a single empty spot. At this moment, even his liver was trembling. Su Zhu's eyes were red, and his body was trembling like he was having a stroke. There was only one thought in his mind. I'm rich. I'm completely rich. In fact, he wasn't the only one. All the cultivators who entered the house were probably thinking the same thing. The chaotic battle soon came to an end. Treasures were everywhere, and everyone was busy picking and collecting them. Who would be in the mood to fight? Even if he killed his opponent, so what? If he had the time, he might as well collect more treasures. Not to mention, fighting was risky. A moment of carelessness could cause one to lose oneself. Everyone wanted to be the oriole. No one wanted to be the pitiful cicada that was about to be eaten. The fog in the bamboo forest tumbled about. Channel after channel formed, sending cultivators here. More and more cultivators gathered in the mansion. Although this place was filled with treasures, no one would despise them. They had taken more. As the number of cultivators continued to increase, although it was still stable on the surface, everyone had turned into pickers. But it was like a bamboo basket covering a stove. Unbeknownst to him, a flame had suddenly sprung out of it with a whoosh. Everyone was sucked in. They tumbled and struggled in the raging flames, like a living hell. Chin Yu sighed. He stared at the lump of iron in his hand, a bitter smile on his face. He wasn't someone who would easily give up, but more and more cultivators were arriving in the mansion. In this relatively barren courtyard, 4 or 5 groups of cultivators had arrived. Although Chin Yu and Wan Jing hadn't been discovered yet, it was better to be cautious. Chin Yu flipped his hand and put away the lump of iron. He decided to stop pouring magic power into it. Once he left this place, he would have plenty of time. He took a deep breath and calmed down the gloomy and unwillingness in his heart. His eyes flashed, and he revealed a thoughtful look. Now, there were enough cultivators in the courtyard. If they took the treasures here, they would naturally trigger the strength of the contract. Before, there weren't many, so there might not have been any reaction. But now there should be some changes. Outside the mansion, the fog in the bamboo forest quietly began to spread. It first surrounded the entire mansion and then crossed over the walls. Then, bit by bit, it completely submerged the mansion. The fog was poisonous. Chin Yu had already personally experienced this. As long as there were fluctuations of life, they would be attacked by the poison. The fog's poison targeted a cultivator's soul. After coming into contact with it, it would constantly corrode. This startled the cultivators in the mansion who were busy collecting treasures. But they soon discovered that although the fog's poison was fierce, they didn't need to fear it. This was because they had more than enough treasures in their hands. And what was good was that most of these treasures could help cultivators resist the poison in the fog. Then things were simple. Of course, it wasn't that no one doubted the purpose of the fog. But in the current situation, they didn't have any other choice. The fog was here. It was poisonous, and the poison was fierce. Moreover, it targeted the soul. After coming into contact with it, it would be troublesome. The antidote was in their hands. If they ate it, there might be a problem, but if they didn't, they would die. Was there even a need to choose? Chin Yu had waited for so long. This was the change he expected, but his mood wasn't good. Although he was the first to arrive here and had seen this mansion filled with treasures, he didn't dare to touch a single thing. This also led to the poisonous fog spreading out and invading the wooden hut, covering him and Master Yin. He could only forcefully resist it. As was said before, if it was just Chin Yu alone, then the poison wouldn't affect him too much. But Master Yin couldn't. If Chin Yu wanted her to continue living, he could only choose to bear the burden for her. If he didn't choose, then Master Yin would soon die, so this was the life of a lion egg. Although it seemed as if there were many choices, the truth was that there was only a single path, and the one he didn't want to walk the most. He tried calling out to the little blue lamp, but there was no response at all. This left Chin Yu secretly cold. If the fog was hidden so well, then this meant that the realm within the realm he was in was likely being watched. And the master of these eyes must be extremely strong, so strong that even the little blue lamp had to completely restrain its aura. As he thought about the many young powerhouses that had broken into the land of chaos, such as Heavenly Sword Sexling Xiao, Xiangzhang Academy's Wanjing, and so on, there was definitely some inside story. Thus, this situation wasn't difficult to understand, but understanding was one thing. Without the little blue lamp's help, things would become a bit troublesome. The poison in the fog after touching the soul would produce a corrosive effect. It was similar to a corrosive effect. The good thing was that every time a certain amount of the soul was corroded, an equal amount of poison would be consumed. The bad thing was that this fog was endless. Unless one escaped from it, the poison would continue to invade their body without end. Qin Yu could use the strength of his soul to help Master Yun consume the poison. But soul strength was different from magic power. Without the help of external objects, the recovery speed would be relatively slow. In the current situation, no one knew how long the poisonous fog would last. Qin Yu couldn't take the risk of weakening himself. Then there was only one choice. Qin Yu reached out a hand and placed it on Master Yun's body. A pure soul strength instantly poured into her body. At the same time, the pitiful wails of the old turtle echoed in his mind. "Master, please take pity on me. I am too weak. I cannot withstand such extraction." The corners of his lips twitched. No matter how he thought about it, this fellow's words didn't sound right. Forget it. In consideration of his efforts, Qin Yu wouldn't bother arguing with him. The old turtle was weak, but a conservative estimate was that he could maintain this weakened state for several dozen more years. Thus, drawing out a bit of his soul strength wasn't too much of a problem. After temporarily solving Master Yun's problem, Qin Yu looked at the floating fog in front of him, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. First there was a massive amount of treasures, and then there was this poisonous fog. If she didn't want to die, she could only obediently use the treasures to save her life. If Qin Yu said there wasn't a problem here, he would have to pluck out his own head. Looking at this pace, there were definitely more tricks to be played. He would just have to wait and see. Qin Yu hadn't even seen what tricks the master of this residence had up his sleeves. But the cultivators that broke into the residence were already starting to have problems. The reason was simple. No matter how many treasures there were in the residence, they couldn't withstand the wanton plundering of so many cultivators. At the start, everyone was busy harvesting. Even if there were some conflicts, they would just coldly laugh and let it go. But as time passed and the number of treasures decreased, more and more conflicts occurred. Gradually, anger began to grow within them. Of course, there was also a potentially important factor, the fog that covered the residence. The fog was poisonous and could damage the soul. One needed to refine and absorb treasures in order to resist it. No one knew how long they would be trapped here. Even though everyone had an abundant amount of treasures in their hands, this didn't affect their hopes of obtaining more. In particular, the cultivators that entered the residence. Although their cultivations weren't too bad, there were still differences in strength. The weak were fine, but the strong would still have some thoughts. An ordinary and nameless green grass had caused the first murder in the residence. The specific process wasn't important. What was important was that as one side died, horror descended upon them. The dead cultivator's body turned to powder. A crimson bead the size of a dragon's appeared in front of everyone. No one knew what this blood bead was. At the start, even though they were surprised, they didn't pay much attention to it. This was because as the cultivator turned to powder, his storage magic tool was also destroyed and all sorts of things exploded on the ground. Of course, this included all the things he had collected after entering the house. In a chaotic battle, the blood bead was taken away by someone during this process. The matter of someone dying didn't cause anyone to panic. In the dangerous world of cultivators, this was a normal occurrence to begin with. But after this day, within the courtyard that was covered by the poisonous fog, people began to constantly die. The number increased, and a terrifying shadow covered everyone's hearts, because things began to become strange. Chapter 1190. In the beginning, there were reasons for people to die. For example, two parties were fighting over a treasure, or there was already hatred between them. But gradually a change occurred. There was no longer a need for a reason to kill. In fact, it could even be used to deliberately kill other cultivators. And it just so happened that, at this time, the fog that covered the courtyard changed again. The poison was still the same poison, but for some reason, it gradually gained the ability to block divine sense and conceal one's aura. This undoubtedly provided the murder with a more convenient condition. Thus, the number of cultivators who died increased rapidly in a short period of time. There was no love or hate without reason in this world. In this place, there was no reason to kill without reason. There must be a problem here. The courtyard was only so big. No matter how cautious the murderer was, with the cover of the fog, there would eventually be a time when they would be exposed. Especially as the massacre continued, the number of cultivators decreased greatly. The remaining people became even more cautious and joined forces to protect themselves. Thus, after a fishing, a group of fearful and uneasy cultivators finally discovered the secret hidden within the massacre. That's right, this secret was something that many people had seen with their own eyes. After a cultivator died, their body turned into powder and condensed into a blood bead. Everything in the world originally had no name. Later on, someone gave it a name. After it was called, it became their own name. Human bead was its name. After a cultivator died, their essence, energy, and divine blood were all stripped away and their body turned into powder. Only then could this blood bead be condensed. Calling it human bead was actually a very fitting name. It was so fitting that people couldn't help but feel a chill down their spine just by hearing it. But cultivators weren't ordinary people. To be more precise, they had cold, hard, and strong hearts, as well as a strong ability to accept things that far exceeded ordinary people. A horrifying origin didn't matter, as long as the human bead was useful to them. And it just so happened that it was a very amazing treasure. After swallowing a human bead, a cultivator's cultivation would rapidly increase in a short period of time. They could even break through the bottleneck of cultivation in one go. What was even more tempting was that, perhaps because the human bead was the accumulation of a cultivator's everything, it could even increase a cultivator's potential. As mentioned before, there were countless living beings in the world. Even if one stepped onto the great Tao of cultivation, it didn't mean that everything would be smooth sailing. Even if one's luck was extremely good and they avoided all kinds of disasters and they worked hard enough, when their potential reached its limit, even if they knew that there was still a great Tao in front of them, they could not take another step forward. To be able to raise one's cultivation by leaps and bounds, as well as raise the limits of one's potential, there was really no need for anything more than that. Just these 2 points were more than enough to drive anyone crazy. Therefore, after the murderer who was interrogated was executed, the ownership of the human pearl became quite unpleasant. Not long after, this group of cultivators, who had formed an alliance to protect themselves, completely collapsed due to a few internal killings. No one could be trusted, because to the cultivators in the courtyard, every living cultivator was a moving pearl. Even the closest of friends, cultivators from the same sect, or even lovers in love, none of them could guarantee that they wouldn't be stabbed in the back to end their lives. At this moment, the trust between people had completely vanished. All that was left was cold killing intent and burning greed. The residents had now truly turned into a living hell. Chinyu didn't leave the wooden hut, but that didn't mean he didn't know what was happening outside. In particular, after the old turtle displayed what could be called perfect stealth talent, he was able to see everything clearly. Towards the slaughter happening outside, he was indifferent on the surface, but his heart was icy cold. To a cultivator, killing people wasn't anything at all. But this residence had turned a group of powerful, calm and powerful cultivators into wild beasts that only knew how to kill. He had guessed that there would be a follow-up, but this follow-up was a bit too cruel. Of course, sighing was just sighing. Chinyu didn't change his original intentions because of this, nor did he have the impulse to become the savior of the world. Everyone here was a stranger, so if they died, then they died. If he thought it was cruel, then at most he would just close his eyes and watch for a little longer. It was impossible to save them. Chinyu wouldn't throw his life away just because of some so-called pity. When he was outside the mountain, in order to frighten everyone, Chinyu had already exposed his ability to grasp the space laws. And now there was the human bead. Although Qin Yu guessed that the appearance of the human pearl was likely related to the contract that the old turtle mentioned, he didn't touch anything in the house. Even if he died, there was a high chance that the human pearl wouldn't change. But the others didn't know. In this current situation, once Qin Yu appeared, he would immediately become the target of public criticism. It was second only to the great Tao of time, and even sages might not be able to completely grasp the space laws. Who wouldn't covet it? And now, the chance was right in front of him. Once he killed Qin Yu and ate up the human pearl he formed, everything would be over. It's yours. Qin Yu decided to be a completely cowardly tortoise. He hid himself well and waited for new changes to appear. Although he didn't know what the purpose of the owner of the house was, there was no point in killing people. He couldn't allow the cultivators in the house to kill each other endlessly. Thinking like this was correct, and Qin Yu was indeed prepared to do so. He did not even want the treasure, so there was no way he would be interested in the mysterious human pearl. But sometimes what you think and what you will face will never be able to match. The old tortoise saw burning wind. This descendant of the fire-bathing lineage might have had bad luck, but he was at the end of the order of the cultivators that entered the house. In other words, by the time he entered, the fog had already arrived, but he hadn't collected too many treasures. This was certainly a matter that left him unhappy. In particular, after he learned that the first cultivators to arrive had all obtained great harvests, his unhappiness rose to another level. But fortunately, the slaughter soon arrived. Burning Wind, who wanted to kill and steal treasures, was in fact the first group of people to discover the secret of the human pearl. Thus, by today, not only was he rich, but his cultivation had risen to an astonishing degree compared to when he entered the mystic realm. He had already clearly touched upon the threshold of the original God realm. If it weren't for condensing an even more powerful and perfect source of his own great Tao, he was confident he could break through in one go. Not too long ago, Burning Wind encountered a strange cultivator. He had no impression of this person, but he was extremely strong. He was so strong that even in his current state, Burning Wind could feel an intense, dangerous aura coming from this person. At the same time, there was a nearly unbearable temptation. That's right, temptation. This word wasn't wrong. Burning Wind encountered a man, but it had nothing to do with his sexual orientation. Instead, he felt the aura of the great Tao from this strange cultivator. His strong intuition constantly stirred Burning Wind's nerves. As long as he killed this person and swallowed the human pearl, he could condense a perfect source of the great Tao and become an original God realm cultivator. Becoming an original God realm cultivator wasn't a big deal, but a perfect source of the great Tao. Any God realm cultivator couldn't bear this temptation. Therefore, although he knew it was risky, Burning Wind still decided to take action after a short hesitation. His original intention was to sneak attack. Even if he couldn't kill the enemy with one strike, he could at least give himself a slight advantage. However, whether it was a coincidence or something else, the strange cultivator seemed to have some thoughts about Burning Wind. Neither of them could sneak attack the other, and the battle broke out the moment they met. Both of them were very strong, so strong that they couldn't kill each other in a short time. Intentionally or unintentionally, they began to avoid other cultivators, moving to the corners of the house to avoid being taken advantage of. Then, they arrived at a small courtyard that few people visited. Behind it was an empty woodshed. Qin Yu helplessly discovered that he was faced with a difficult choice. Burning Wind had delivered himself to his doorstep. Should he kill him or not? If he killed him, there was a chance he would be exposed. Even with Qin Yu's shrewdness, he still felt his heart tremble just thinking about the consequences. But if he didn't kill him, with Teacher Yun's current condition, it was hard to say how long she could last. If she died, everything Qin Yu had done before would be meaningless. He didn't hesitate for too long. He took a deep breath, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Qin Yu had entered the endless sea and rushed through the land of chaos to become famous, to obtain attention, and then to obtain a chance to enter the peach blossom spring. His original plan was to run through the entire endless sea, but because of the old turtle, he had no choice but to make a last-minute change. Now this plan was doomed to fail. If he wanted to accomplish his goal of becoming famous, then this realm within the endless sea was the best choice. In fact, Qin Yu even suspected that the reason so many tyrannical cultivators had rushed into the endless sea's smelting trial was because of that formidable soul body in this realm within the realm within the realm. And Teacher Yin was most likely the key to suppressing it. It was similar to what he said before. It seemed as if there were many choices, but the truth was that there was only one path to take. It wasn't that he couldn't take another path, but he would need to give up some things, and these things were often very important. Burning Wind was fighting. He had guessed how strong his opponent was, but he discovered that he had still underestimated him. Very strong. This was the only label that Burning Wind could place on his opponent right now. He had already attacked with all his strength, and it seemed as if he had the upper hand on the surface. But for some unknown reason, he felt a sense of unease in his heart. Soon, Burning Wind found the reason why he felt uneasy. His opponent was very calm, even though he was at a disadvantage and was nearly severely wounded by Burning Wind's fierce attacks. This strange cultivator's eyes were no different from before. They had changed far too much, as if everything was within his grasp. Startled, Burning Wind inwardly shivered. He wasn't afraid, but when he attacked, he subconsciously held back a bit of caution. Soon, what happened proved that Burning Wind's caution was correct. Bang! After a close combat, the strange cultivator suddenly looked up, a cold sneer at the corners of his lips. Then he opened his mouth and spat out a breath. Strictly speaking, it was a gray gas. It was like a living creature, twisting at an astonishing speed. Without giving Burning Wind any time to react, it drilled into his body through the space between his eyebrows. The fire-bathing clan controlled the flames of the world. When they fought with their enemies, their bloodline boiled. Although there were no flames around their bodies, there was a blazing high-temperature barrier. This barrier was a formidable layer of defense. But now, in front of this gray gas, the high-temperature barrier was clearly useless. It was easily pierced through. Burning Wind's body suddenly froze, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Extreme cold erupted in that instant, and Burning Wind's heartbeat nearly stopped. Shock, anger, and shock appeared in his eyes. To be able to freeze a cultivator of the fire-bathing lineage who erupted with all his strength, this ice-cold strength could be called terrifying. The strange cultivator didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, raised a hand, and blasted towards Burning Wind's forehead. Take advantage of his weakness to take his life. Of course, he wouldn't make the same mistake that would only appear in a stupid plot. What nonsense. After he killed this person, he could say whatever he wanted. Puff! Flesh and blood disintegrated. Burning Wind's shining bald head broke into countless pieces. Red and white matter mixed together and splashed backwards. Then, the headless corpse fell backwards. The strange cultivator let out a breath, excitement in his eyes. As he stared at Burning Wind's headless corpse, his eyes became hot. Mutual attraction probably referred to the relationship between him and Flaming Wind. What Burning Wind felt before, the strange cultivator probably felt the same. Thus, these two people both wanted to kill the other and then swallow the human pearl formed after the other's death. Now, it seemed that he was a step ahead. He seized the opportunity to use his hidden card and kill Burning Wind on the spot. If it weren't for the extreme cold energy in his stomach that restrained the power of fire, wanting to kill this young powerhouse of the fire-bathing lineage wouldn't have been so simple. But luck was also a part of one's ability. He had killed his opponent. This was an indisputable fact. As long as he swallowed the human pearl, his strength would rise once more, and he would have no opponent in the entire mystic realm. In fact, he might even be able to kill all the cultivators one by one and turn them into human pearls to swallow. There was also that Qin Yu who had entered the mystic realm first and hadn't appeared yet. He was absolutely a must-kill option. The space laws, that was the legendary space laws. Just thinking about it made him drool. Coming to the land of chaos this time had been the right decision. He took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the burning heat in his heart. The strange cultivator licked his lips and subconsciously frowned. Something didn't seem right. Burning Wind had already died. So why hadn't he formed a human pearl? Was it because he was stronger, so the speed at which he formed the pearl was slower? Something was wrong. The strange cultivator's eyes widened. His reaction wasn't slow, but the terrifyingly high temperature had already erupted like a volcano. Bang! Crimson tongues of flame wrapped around him. No, impossible. The strange cultivator crazily struggled. You are already dead. Within the flames, Burning Wind's icy voice echoed out. My fire-bathing lineage has a supreme treasure that can bestow a flame substitute. It is the same as having another life. You killed me, but the flames are also me. The bald Burning Wind's face appeared in the flames, his eyes cold and callous. I have already answered your question. Now you can go on your way in peace. No. The strange cultivator screamed. But after falling into the flames, he had already lost the initiative. A moment later, with a light puff, the flames vanished from sight. A charred corpse fell to the ground, directly turning into powder. A crimson human, pearl the size of an egg, appeared in front of him. Flames condensed around his body. Burning Wind leaned against the door, his complexion pale. He gasped for breath, his eyes incomparably bright. He had won. He reached out and took the human pearl in his hand. However, right at this moment, Flaming Wind's figure suddenly stiffened. Katja! There was the crisp sound of bones breaking. A terrifying dark aura instantly invaded his orifices and severed all his vitality. I heard that you have 2 lives. I wonder if you can come back to life this time. The truth was that he couldn't. Qin Yu looked down at the 2 incomparably crimson human pearls in his hand. Added together, they were the size of a goose egg. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Could this thing really not be eaten? Chapter 1191. Qin Yu had thought of countless ways to kill Burning Wind, but he never imagined that this would be the final result. Of course, when Burning Wind died, he definitely didn't think that he would be like an old hen whose neck was casually snapped by someone else. This could be said to be extremely sullen, but killing was killing. No matter what method was used, no matter how unbelievable the process was, wasn't the result the most important thing? Returning to the question above, the human bead couldn't be eaten. No matter how explosive its effects were, Qin Yu wouldn't touch it. But what about Teacher Yin? Before entering this courtyard, Qin Yu didn't know that Burning Wind would turn into a human bead the size of an egg after being killed. In other words, the method he asked the old turtle to save Teacher Yin could no longer be used. He had to make a difficult choice. If he fed Teacher Yin the human bead formed after Burning Wind's death, there was a chance he could save her, but there was also a chance he could push her into an unfathomably terrifying abyss. Qin Yu hesitated. When it concerned himself, he could kill without hesitation. But now it concerned the life and death of others. But the development of events soon made it so that Qin Yu couldn't hesitate any longer. Teacher Yin's condition began to worsen. This didn't exceed Qin Yu's expectations. In fact, it was already good luck that she was able to forcefully extend her life to this point under the bloodline backlash. He could either watch her die or eat the human bead and gamble his life. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if there really was a problem, he could think of a solution later. Then it all depends on your fate. Qin Yu pinched open her mouth and placed the human bead formed after Burning Wind's death into her mouth. Then he lifted his chin and swallowed it. A moment later, his fingers moved twice. Teacher Yun slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze fell on Qin Yu, and after a brief moment of confusion, she said, "Big brother Qin." Her voice was weak and hoarse. Qin Yu smiled, disregarding everything else. At least Teacher Yin had come back to life. "Don't speak for now." He lifted a hand and carefully sensed her body. He determined that the bloodline backlash had subsided and she was in a state of constant strengthening. He relaxed a little. It seemed that Teacher Yen's luck wasn't bad. At least, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with her. "You're fine for now. If you feel any discomfort, you must tell me immediately." Qin Yu withdrew his hand and earnestly said. A look of gratitude surfaced on Yun Shi's face. "Thank you, brother Qin. If not for you, I would have been dead by now." Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. He said, "I won't hide it. The reason why I saved you was because I had my own considerations. If I offend you in any way, I hope you can forgive me." Yun Shi widened his eyes in shock before nodding vigorously. "You are the one who saved my life. Big brother Qin, I will help you no matter what you do. What if it wants your life?" As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he immediately suppressed it. Qin Yu said, "You just woke up and your body hasn't recovered yet. Take a rest." "Yes." Yun Shi closed his eyes. Qin Yu sat down beside him, and the surroundings fell silent. Glancing at Master Yun, who seemed to have fallen asleep once more, Qin Yu suddenly remembered that he hadn't taken back the dark moon and crimson sun marks within her body. Forget it. It wouldn't be too late to take it back after she wakes up. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu began to adjust his breathing. The dark moon and crimson sun no longer needed to provide him with strength. This was the same as undoing a shackle that had tightly bound his body. As long as he adjusted his breathing for a period of time, he would be able to restore himself to his peak condition. But not long after Qin Yu closed his eyes, a feeling of dread erupted from deep within his heart. His eyes flew open, beads of sweat covering his forehead. His eyes swept around like lightning. Everything was calm as it was in the beginning. There was only the sleeping Master Yin lying beside him, breathing evenly. That horrifying aura Qin Yu felt just now seemed to have been an illusion. His eyes darkened and a dignified expression appeared on his face. But before he could think further, his complexion changed. He looked up. The fog obscured his vision, but after approaching a certain distance, he could still feel cultivators approaching. More than one. Qin Yu's first thought was that Burning Wind's battle with a strange cultivator had aroused the attention of other cultivators. But he soon discovered that this wasn't the case. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With the sound of breaking air, several figures rushed into the courtyard. Their eyes all fell upon the tightly shut entrance to the wooden shed. Qin Yu's heart sank. They were coming for him. But why? When he killed Burning Wind, he had acted quickly and decisively. Even if he revealed a bit of his aura, it was impossible for others to sense it with the poisonous fog covering it. There was no time to think about this, because someone had already attacked. It was Wan Jing. He lifted a hand and smashed the wooden shed's door apart. A calm voice sounded out. "Brother Qin, at this time, are you still not ready to come out?" Master Yin was startled awake. Her face paled. Qin Yu glanced at her, indicating that she didn't need to worry, even though he didn't have any confidence in himself. In terms of hidden cards, he didn't fear anyone outside, even if they had more or less eaten up some human beads. Facing the combined forces of so many people, his chances of victory were close to zero. Although this was the truth, after a brief moment of shock and anger, Qin Yu quickly calmed down. Panicking was useless. It would only speed up his own death. Moreover, he hadn't even fought yet, so it was unknown what the result would be. Since they had already come knocking on his door, continuing to hide was meaningless. Qin Yu gestured for Master Yun to lie on his back and then opened the spell. Space trembled and two figures appeared out of thin air. Wan Jing's eyes blazed with heat. He immediately smiled. "Brother Qin, we meet again. As he spoke, his eyes swept over Master Yin and his pupils shrank. This miss has actually woken up. Does that mean that hateful baldy burning wind has already been killed by you? Wan Jing already knew that Master Yin came from the fire-bathing lineage and needed to kill to save her life. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes at him. That's right. The several people on the other side stirred. After swallowing up the human beads, Burning Wind's strength was in the top echelon within the residence. This was a publicly acknowledged fact. But now he had actually died under Qin Yu's hands. Everyone naturally dreaded his strength. Wan Jing clapped her hands and laughed. Brother Qin is really good at using this move of borrowing strength. But unfortunately, I just happened to sense a trace of aura belonging to the bathing fire lineage not long ago. If I'm not mistaken, Burning Wind was fighting with someone at that time. He suddenly stepped down. A strong wind blew past, dispersing the fog and revealing 2 sets of torn robes on the ground. Haha, so it was like this. I never thought that Burning Wind would die in such a sullen manner. He must be filled with resentment underground. Wan Jing looked over. Brother Qin's luck is quite good. After confirming that Burning Wind's death was the result of a fisherman taking advantage of the situation, everyone let out a sigh of relief. Qin Yu had a calm expression. He didn't reveal the least bit of panic because he was exposed. My luck has always been good. Wan Jing, if you don't believe me, you can try. Let's see who dies today. Wan Jing laughed. Brother Qin must be joking. From the first time I met you, I never dared to underestimate your strength. He paused for a moment, and then his smile became even brighter. So, in order to show how much I value Brother Qin, since I am prepared to kill you, we will naturally join forces. Qin Yu said, It is rare to see someone with skin as thick as yours. Wan Jing nodded. Thank you for Brother Qin's praise. The cultivator from the Thunder Dominion stood at the side with mockery in his eyes. He thought to himself that the master was right. Putting aside the cultivation level of those who came from Xiangzhang Academy, in terms of shamelessness alone, no one could beat them. But this Qin Yu was quite calm. The Thunder Dominion cultivator looked at Qin Yu. Although he was surrounded, and it was clear that he was about to face a perilous situation, he didn't reveal the least bit of panic. Of course, this was all an act. In this situation, it was impossible for a normal person to maintain such a calm appearance. But then again, to be able to act like this in such a situation in itself wasn't simple. Thinking of this, the Thunder Dominion cultivator couldn't help but feel a bit of appreciation. He thought that if there was a chance, he might as well give Qin Yu a quick death, so he wouldn't suffer anymore. That's right, appreciation was appreciation. But the Thunder Dominion cultivator wasn't optimistic about Qin Yu's fate. He swept his eyes around. Of those that came here, including Wan Jing, none of them were easy to deal with. Even if he didn't fear fighting one-on-one, he would still be forced into a passive position if he faced 2. And if there were 3, he could only flee in panic. But now, Qin Yu was facing a total of 7 people. The strength they could erupt with when they joined forces could even withstand several strikes from a half-saint. Since we've seen the main character, let's attack. A cultivator said, his icy cold eyes locked onto Qin Yu. Because of the space laws, Qin Yu was absolutely the most famous of all the cultivators that entered the mystic realm. When the secret of the human bead was revealed to the public, countless cultivators had imagined just how happy it would be if they could kill Qin Yu. And now, this chance was right in front of them. Wan Jing smiled and cupped her hands together. Brother Qin, have a safe journey. Bang, bang, a wild strength instantly erupted, tearing apart the fog. It was like a broken dam, its momentum swallowing the world. Qin Yu's body tensed. His eyes instantly turned dark, like the deep night without any impurities. A darkness as thick as ink was released from his body, spreading out in all directions like a gaping maw that could swallow all. The attacks from the 7 people crashed into the darkness in the blink of an eye. The darkness violently tumbled, expanding over 10 times its original size. Then, in the next moment, it was forcefully torn apart by a wild strength. Qin Yu fell to his knees, blood flowing out from every orifice on his head. Countless wounds opened up on his body, and blood gushed out. In an instant, his black robes were soaked through. Drip, drip, blood dripped down from the corners of his robes, falling to the ground and shattering. Qin Yu's appearance was miserable, but as the 7 people saw this, their complexions became increasingly dignified and a trace of admiration appeared in their eyes. It had to be known that the darkness that erupted just now had resisted their attacks in an instant. For Qin Yu to survive was already amazing enough. If it were them, no matter how much they didn't want to admit it, the truth was that none of the 7 of them had any confidence they would have survived. Wan Jing was secretly shocked. Luckily, she hadn't recklessly attacked Qin Yu when they first met. Otherwise, there was a high chance he would have died. But in today's situation, no matter how strong Qin Yu was, he couldn't escape death. Big Brother Qin. Master Yen's face was pale and blood flowed out from the corners of her lips. Even though Qin Yu was blocking in front of her, the terrifying collision of strength had still injured her. Her hands nervously moved over Qin Yu's body. Soon, her hands were dyed red, but she couldn't stop the blood from gushing out. Cough, cough. Qin Yu coughed. His face paled even more, and more blood gushed out from his wounds. Don't worry, I'm fine. He spoke calmly, but his words clearly didn't have the slightest bit of credibility. More tears flowed down Master Yen's cheeks. She shook her head and hugged Qin Yu's neck tightly. He didn't know if it was because he had lost too much blood, causing his body to fall into a weakened state. But at this moment, Qin Yu felt that Master Yen's arms were too tight, so tight that he found it hard to breathe. Qin Yu began to cough again. He raised his hand and patted Master Yen's hand, indicating for her to loosen her grip. But before he could speak, Master Yen let go. It was as if she couldn't dodge in time, as if she were hugging a red-hot iron. Then, Qin Yu suddenly felt as if his chest was on fire, burning him so hot that he shivered. Pata! The lump of iron fell to the ground. The blood on its surface seeped into it, causing it to rapidly turn crimson. It was as if there was magma flowing within. Chapter 1192. Qin Yu seemed to laugh and cry at the same time. At this time, he no longer cared about Master Yen's abnormal actions. He stared at the increasingly bright, red lump of iron on the ground. He never imagined that he would make such a low-level mistake, one that was no different from a joke. The scene in front of him was enough to explain everything. In truth, activating the lump of iron was very simple. All he needed to do was pour his blood on it. What was sad was that Qin Yu had spent a great deal of effort these past days. He didn't know how much magic power he had poured into the lump of iron, but all of it was useless. La. The poison fog in the air seemed to be incinerated by flames. With muffled sounds of corrosion, it rapidly faded away. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the crimson lump of iron on the ground. Of course, after it was activated, it wasn't appropriate to call it that anymore. Its appearance was the same as before. In fact, it was even redder and uglier than before. But at this time, its appearance couldn't affect anyone's perception of it. This was because, in the world of cultivators, everything was fabricated. Only strength reigned supreme. And now, this lump of iron was recklessly spewing out a horrifying aura that left one's heart racing and filled with despair. It was truly terrifying, like a volcano erupting, like the vault of heaven shattering, like the world falling into a catastrophe that would destroy everything. Whether it was Ruanjing or the Thunder Dominion cultivator, all 7 people froze. Fear erupted from the depths of their hearts, flooding into their eyes. Qin Yu coughed several times and spat out several mouthfuls of blood. He wiped his hands and sat down on the ground. He looked up at the 7 people and said, "Who else wants to kill me?" No one spoke. Ruanjing, who had been lively from the start, kept his mouth tightly shut, not saying a single word more. What nonsense! In this situation, he wished he could find a hole to crawl into and run as far away as he could. If he continued to provoke Chinyu, what was the difference between that and seeking death? Perhaps there was a difference. There were many ways to seek death, and most of them could leave with an intact corpse. But if Chinyu were to attack now and be struck by this lump of iron, he feared he would instantly be vaporized. There wouldn't even be a speck of dust left over. That taste would surely be exhilarating to the extreme. But Wan Jing swore that he didn't want to experience it at all. Gulp! It was unknown who gulped. But in this extremely quiet environment, it was particularly clear. But the good news was that everyone was scared to death, and no one would laugh at him. Cough! The Thunder Dominion cultivator squeezed out a smile. Fellow Taoist Chin, today was all a misunderstanding. She only said one sentence and couldn't continue the rest of the sentence. At this moment, Zhou Lei felt a little more admiration for Wan Jing. It was too difficult for him to change his attitude so quickly and calmly. It could be seen that being thick-skinned was also a godly survival skill. That's right. It's all a misunderstanding. Our souls were injured by the poisonous mist, and we were momentarily distracted. That's why we attacked, Brother Chin. Please forgive us, Brother Chin. A cultivator spoke with a face full of guilt. His eyes and expression were on point. With just a glance, one could feel that his chest was filled with shame and remorse. Zhou Lei of the Thunder Domain gasped in amazement. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It turned out that it wasn't just the people from Xiangzhang Academy who were shameless. There were many such cultivators outside. It was no wonder that the master rarely came out in the past few years. At the same time, he instructed them to minimize contact with the cultivators outside. Zhou Lei believed that he was one of the smarter ones among the cultivators in the lightning domain. If it had been anyone else, they would probably not have been able to react even after being tricked to death. Brother Chin! Wan Jing cried out in pain. Tears streamed down his face. Everything is my fault. I coveted the space laws and made Brother Chin my enemy. Wan Jing knows that I don't have the face to beg for mercy from you. But I ask that Brother Chin leave me an intact corpse so that I can have a chance to be buried in the Academy's mausoleum and accompany my late master. Zhou Lei's eyes widened. He looked at the pained Wan Jing, who was filled with fear and remorse. Just what sort of trick was this? Although he hadn't had much contact with Wan Jing, he had an approximate understanding of just what sort of person he was. It was him. Would he seek death on his own initiative? And he even said that he would leave him an intact corpse? To a cultivator, there were only two differences in the world: to live or to die. Death was death. No matter how well a corpse was preserved, there was no meaning to it. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. Looking at Wan Jing's performance, he suddenly said, "Wan Jing, I won't hide it from you. The truth is that I don't know much about Xiangzhang Academy, including you. So, if you want to express something, you had best be direct. Otherwise, if I don't understand, I'll do as you ask." Wan Jing's tears immediately stopped. He stared at Qin Yu and discovered that he really wasn't playing any tricks. He couldn't help but shiver. Damn it, he had almost messed things up. Qin Yu didn't know anything. His performance just now was like a blind man watching. Wan Jing wiped away his tears and clenched his teeth. "My honorable master is the late headmaster of Xiangzhang Academy. He has countless brilliant disciples. The current headmaster, the 2 vice headmasters, and over 10 high-ranking lecturers are all my senior apprentice brothers. If I am killed, unless no news is leaked out, they will definitely take revenge for me at any cost." Zhou Lei was left dumbfounded. So there was such a thing in this world. It was simply refreshing. No, that damned Wan Jing, that bastard had ill intentions. He said that no news would be leaked out, but he was clearly saying that only if he killed everyone here or even everyone in this courtyard could he guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Damn it! Out of everyone present, the person Qin Yu hated the most was Wan Jing. Even if he had to kill someone, he would have killed him first. But now, because of this bastard's manipulation, his life was tied to everyone else's. Even if they swore that they wouldn't speak of today's events, would Qinyu believe them? Ha! Even an idiot would know the result. Zhou Lei glared at Wanjing, nearly grinding his teeth to pieces. The other cultivators weren't idiots. If looks could kill, Wanjing would have already been torn apart by them. But at this moment, Wanjing's complexion didn't change at all. Humph. Compared to life and death, there was nothing important in this world, let alone being stared at a few times. Even if he was struck by a hammer, he would accept it. You couldn't help but laugh. Putting aside his character, this Wanjing really was an interesting fellow. Interesting to the point that you really wanted to do something right now and rip off his head. He was strong, his thoughts were meticulous and vicious, his skin thick enough, and he knew when to advance and retreat. In addition to Xiangzhang Academy's background, such an opponent was far too dangerous. But unfortunately, Yu couldn't. At least he couldn't today. Get out of here. Yu didn't laugh anymore. He coldly waved his hand. Wanjing turned and left, not pausing at all. In the blink of an eye, he vanished from sight. This reaction speed left Zhou Lei sighing. But sighing was just sighing. His speed wasn't slow either. Although she couldn't figure out why Yu would let them leave so easily after things had come to this point. Could there be a problem with him? His thoughts raced, but it was only for a moment. He couldn't be sure whether or not there was a problem with Yu. But there was one thing that was beyond doubt. If Yu wanted to kill them, none of them would be able to escape today. Shwa. In a breath of time, the courtyard fell silent. Behind him, Master Yun's timid voice sounded out. Big Brother Qin, her tone was a bit puzzled. You bitterly smiled. I also want to kill these bastards, but this thing can only be used once. Holding it can deter everyone. But if we use it, we'll be in trouble. He put away the red lump of iron in his chest. He glanced at Master Yin and said, I'm not in a good state right now. I need to cultivate and recover from my injuries. Don't run around and stay by my side. Without giving Master Yin a chance to reply, Yu began to adjust his breathing. As Master Yin watched Yu close his eyes and his breathing return to normal, she bit her lips and obediently sat down to the side. She looked at Yu and then at him, blinking her large eyes. It was unknown what she was thinking. Then, the following days were peaceful. Of course, this so-called peace was only limited to the small courtyard where Yu and Master Yin were. After being burned by the lump of iron, the poisonous fog was like an apple that had a piece bitten off. For some unknown reason, it never recovered. Yu and Master Yin were undoubtedly much more relaxed now that they were free from the poisonous fog. But to the others, this period of time was nothing short of a hellish nightmare. Every day someone would die. After forming a human pearl, they would be swallowed up. The slaughter in the fog was carried out at all times. The poisonous fog became thicker, and its toxicity became more intense. One had to take more treasures to counteract the poison on their soul. Fortunately, the cultivators that survived swallowed the human pearl and grew stronger, just barely managing to resist the poison. But even so, a trace of unease rose from the depths of their hearts. No one knew how long this situation would last. The treasures in their hands were rapidly being depleted. If they wanted to guard against future calamities, they had to find a way to seize more treasures. Of course, seizing treasures, killing people, and swallowing human pearls could increase their strength and allow them to live longer. Thus, as time passed, the cultivators that survived were the most tyrannical ones. Everyone was wary of each other, but even though they were wary, they still had to fight. Thus, the battles became increasingly brutal. Of course, the victors of each battle also obtained greater benefits. It was as if there was an invisible hand in the courtyard, constantly lashing at the cultivators, forcing them to fight each other. Yu frowned. As he looked at the thicker, poisonous fog outside the courtyard, A thought became increasingly clear in his mind. Raising a parasite. That's right, the cultivators in the courtyard were like parasites in a jar. After being fed a large amount of food, they began to slaughter each other. But in the end, only one person could survive. Could it be that the master of this courtyard only allowed one cultivator to live? If this was really the case, then a brutal battle was unavoidable. Any cultivator that could live in a house that resembled a rearing old man was not easy to deal with. Although Chinyu had the iron lump to protect him, if things really came to a point where he had no choice but to risk his life, there would inevitably be trouble. And more importantly, he wasn't alone. He had Master Yin by his side. Thinking of this, he turned his head to look at the girl sitting on the ground, not too far away. She rested her chin on her hands, her expression as calm as a painting. As if sensing Qinyu's gaze, Master Yin turned her head and gave Qinyu a big smile, bright and beautiful. Qinyu faintly smiled, his eyes warm and his smile doting. Thus, Master Yin's smile became even more dazzling. It had to be said that her smile was truly beautiful. It was so beautiful that Qinyu subconsciously forgot about taking back the dark moon and crimson sun. The old turtle no longer dared to run out. According to what he said, the poison in the fog was already strong enough to harm him. If someone else had said this, Qinyu would have believed them. But since it came from the mouth of the old turtle, he definitely had to discount it. According to Qinyu's calculations, he should have felt threatened, but there was still some distance from the poison actually harming him. However, now that time had passed, whether or not the old turtle went out to probe the fog didn't matter much anymore. In the beginning, a massive number of cultivators had rushed into this courtyard, thinking that they had discovered a hidden treasure. But now, most of them had already died. The number of people still alive could be counted on 2 hands. Even if they were raising parasites, it should have ended by now. Could it be that only one person was allowed to live until the end? Even if they were stronger, what use was that? 2 more days passed. During this time, 2 great battles erupted. One of them was Sky Split, sword cultivator Ling Xiao. His current strength had risen to a terrifying degree. Even Qinyu felt a chill in his heart when he used his final sword strike to kill his enemy. On the 3rd day, the poison fog that covered the courtyard finally began to retreat. A sharp light flashed in Qinyu's eyes. This cruel and merciless slaughter was finally coming to an end. But he didn't know what awaited them next. Chapter 1193. The fog dissipated. In the end, including Qinyu and Master Yin, there were only 9 people left. The rest had become human pearls. Strictly speaking, besides the one in Qinyu's hand that belonged to the strange cultivator killed by burning wind, the rest had entered the stomachs of the surviving cultivators. This was cruel, but those who survived all had calm expressions. There was no regret, no unease, and no guilt at all. This was because within the poison fog that covered the courtyard, if they didn't kill others, they would be killed. There were many familiar faces here. Ruanjing, Ling Xiao, Hooking Soul, Thunder Domain Zhou Lei, everyone else had some impression of them. The cultivators that could survive to the end were certainly not ordinary characters. They gathered in the vestibule, each standing in a corner. The fog dissipated, disregarding whether or not they could condense a human pearl after killing so many people. Even if they could, it was unknown who died. Reality had already proven that everyone here was the most terrifying existence amongst predators. There were far too many uncertainties in a free-for-all slaughter. Of course, there was another reason no one here was a fool. By now, they knew there was definitely a problem with this courtyard. They had stopped killing each other, but the true horror might have just arrived. Thus, the surviving cultivators all gathered in the vestibule. This was a tacit agreement to join forces to resist the unknown dangers. Qinyu also arrived with Master Yin. His appearance immediately attracted everyone's attention. Everyone revealed a dignified expression. Although not everyone had personally witnessed the existence of this lump of iron, It was no longer a secret after so many days had passed. Qin Yu held this great killing tool in his hand. If he had any thoughts, they would be in great danger. Wan Jing coughed. He moved several steps and stood together with the Skyrend sword cultivator. As he moved, Hooking Soul also came to their side. The three of them had one thing in common. They had a tense relationship with Qin Yu. In this situation, as long as Qin Yu wasn't an idiot, the chances of him attacking them weren't high. But when it came to his own safety, it was best to be careful. Zhou Lei coughed and smiled. "Brother Qin, you've arrived." He decided to take the initiative to speak up and temper his own skin. He hoped that one day he could reach the level of Wan Jing's strength. This goal seemed a bit too high. One shouldn't bite off more than they could chew. It was better to be realistic. Qin Yu nodded to Zhou Lei, not saying anything. He could certainly feel the dread in everyone's eyes as they looked at him. This was very normal. If it were him, he would have done the same. Qin Yu brought Master Yin to a corner of the vestibule and looked up at the sky. His thoughts were similar to everyone else's. Since he had finished raising the goo, it was about time for the final step. The soul body of the middle realm of the body concealment realm. It was time to show up. As if sensing Qin Yu's thoughts, at this moment, the air in the courtyard suddenly became a bit hotter. It was like burning charcoal. When Xiao Chen got a little closer, he could clearly feel a burning pain on his skin. Here it comes. Everyone cried out in their hearts at the same time. Their bodies tensed up and their eyes were filled with coldness. To raise them as goo worms, one had to have sufficiently powerful methods. Otherwise, they wouldn't mind letting the people behind them taste the feeling of backlash. But strangely, apart from the rising heat in the air, everything else was calm and nothing had happened. No, to be exact, a change had occurred. The temperature was rising. The heat in the air was becoming more and more intense. If there was only one charcoal brazier that was slightly closer to each other before, there were now 2, then 3, and the number was still increasing. Cultivators defied the heavens and changed their fate. Apart from maintaining their appearance, the essence of an ordinary person had already transformed to a different level. Strictly speaking, the two sides were no longer the same species. They had an extremely strong ability to adapt to the outside environment. Being attacked by extreme heat and extreme cold was the most common problem. But wanting to cause substantial damage to a powerful cultivator like this was doomed to be futile. But everything had a limit, and the strength of a cultivator didn't have an upper limit. For instance, when Qin Yu rushed through the Arctic Sea, that terrifying chill had frozen him to death before he could even find the path back to Vastyong. And at this time, the temperature in the courtyard was also gradually rising to a terrifying level. Everyone's complexion became dignified. They gloomily looked around, feeling a trace of unease from the burning heat in the air. The cultivators could still resist it, but there were some things in the courtyard that had begun to wither and turn yellow under the high temperature. It wasn't just the plants that would wither and turn yellow. Everything that grew in the courtyard, even a blade of grass, had been snatched away. But the stones were still there, the soil was still there, as well as the various materials used to build the courtyard. Now, it was as if their insides had been stripped of all moisture. Their color darkened and deepened until they finally turned yellow like fallen leaves. Sweat gushed out from his pores. Qin Yu wiped his face and turned to look at Master Yin. She was even hotter than before. Her long dress was soaked through with sweat and stuck to her body. This clearly left Master Yin embarrassed. She looked at Qin Yu and her face flushed even redder. She lowered her head and twisted her fingers, at a loss as to what to do. "Stand behind me." Master Yin hurriedly nodded. She curled up her body and hid behind Qin Yu. Perhaps it was because of her shyness, but even though she was standing close to Qin Yu, she still maintained some distance between them. Qin Yu smiled. His eyes paused on her body for a moment. Only when Master Yun's blush deepened did he look away. But the truth was that Master Yin was overthinking things. In this current situation, No one had the time to even look at her. A wet beauty was naturally a wonderful scene, but one had to look at the right time to enjoy the scenery. Given the current situation, no one knew what would happen. It was unknown whether or not everyone could survive, so who had the time to think about such things? It was even hotter. There was a light cracking sound beneath their feet. It came from where everyone was standing. The bricks on the ground cracked apart and turned into powder. Then flames shot out. In just a few breaths of time, the entire courtyard had turned into a sea of flames. A strange scene appeared. The courtyard and the flames hadn't been burned to ruins. Instead, it maintained its original appearance. But now, crimson lines began to appear on the surface of the buildings. These lines were like meridians. They appeared on the surface of the buildings. Amidst the raging flames, they became increasingly eye-catching. As these lines appeared, the temperature in the air began to rise at an astonishing speed. Even with Qin Yu's powerful mortal body, he could clearly feel the burning pain. He had no choice but to use his cultivation to resist. The other cultivators were naturally in an even worse state. Master Yin began to sweat even more. She no longer cared about her shyness. Her face flushed red as she desperately resisted the burning heat. Seeing Qin Yu lift his hand, she quickly shook her head. "Big brother Qin, I can still hold on. Don't waste your strength for me." What a sensible girl. Qin Yu reminded her, "Be careful. If you can't hold on any longer, tell me." The temperature crazily rose. Soon, it reached a point where everyone found it unbearable. "This courtyard wants to burn us to death. We cannot sit here and wait for death." With a loud roar, a cultivator rushed towards the courtyard gates. With a pung sound, the courtyard gate burst open. Everything went smoothly, and there was not the slightest danger. Seeing that someone had experimented on the mice safe and sound, everyone had reached the limit of their endurance. They didn't want to stay any longer. Whoosh, whoosh, with the sound of breaking air, they flew out of the courtyard. There was a bamboo forest around the courtyard, and there was fog in the bamboo forest. They had all experienced the poison in the fog before, but compared to the burning courtyard, the poison in the fog was nothing at all. But when they rushed out of the courtyard, they all froze in place. The bamboo forest? The fog? Around the courtyard, there was only a pitch-black void. There was nothing at all. Looking up, all they could see was a small gray sky where the courtyard was. Looking further out, there was only darkness, the bamboo forest, and the poison fog. They still had many treasures in their hands, and their strength had increased by leaps and bounds, so they were confident they could rush through. But this pitch-black void in front of them was impossible. There was no reason for this. Just looking at it caused them to instinctively feel fear. A yin chill drilled out from the depths of their hearts and spread through their entire bodies, making them feel as if they had fallen into an icy lake. There was no way out. This caused the nervousness and panic in everyone's hearts to instantly double. Then, they discovered something even more shocking. The black void was expanding. That's right, it was coming from all directions, slowly approaching. The speed wasn't too fast, but the space it left behind was very small. It was only the size of the courtyard. After secretly calculating, it wasn't hard to come up with a conclusion. In at most an hour, the black void would overlap with the courtyard. In other words, if they couldn't find a way to leave within an hour, they would have no choice but to return to the courtyard and continue to suffer the pain of being burned by the flames. There was even a chance they would have to face the dual attacks of the blazing flames and the black void. That feeling would definitely be exhilarating. So exhilarating that no one present, including Qin Yu, wanted to personally taste it. And what left everyone even more anxious and depressed was that even now, they still hadn't seen the person controlling all of this from behind the scenes. Even if they desperately wanted to resist, they still couldn't find a target. They rushed out of the courtyard and temporarily avoided the burning flames. But even though they were some distance away, they could still clearly feel the rising temperature of the flames. They could endure it just now, but if they went back, they absolutely could not go back. Within an hour, they had to find a way to leave this place. But soon, the people outside the courtyard furrowed their eyebrows and paled. They discovered that their previous calculations had been far too optimistic. Or, it was more accurate to say that as they approached the courtyard, the speed at which the black void spread out in all directions was accelerating. An hour, that was simply too much. From what they could see, it would arrive in front of them in, at most, a quarter hour. The eyes of the sword cultivators gathered together were filled with anger. They had just come up with a feasible plan. They would combine everyone's strength and use a secret technique in the Thunder Dominion to help Ling Xiao slash out a sword that surpassed his realm. They would forcefully tear apart this space and escape from this place. But this required time. The preparation of the secret technique was the simplest practice. Although it didn't take too long, it wasn't something that could be completed in a short period of time. In other words, this road had already been blocked off. As for other methods, perhaps there were, but there wasn't enough time. The black void was getting closer, so close that everyone could clearly see the surging within it. It was like a black sea. Although it seemed calm, the truth was that it was filled with endless waves, traces of cold energy constantly transmitted outwards. Suddenly, a strange and horrifying scene appeared in everyone's perception. Half of it was pitch black, and the other half was scorching hot. Qi Niu and the other 9 people had become minced meat sandwiched in the middle. It was like they could only watch helplessly on as they were cooked alive. This was truly a sorrowful and terrifying matter.